Okay.
All right.
Okay. Good morning. As chair of the House ED&A Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, in accordance with House Rule 67 and Governor's Emergency Order 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body, namely the ED&A Committee, is authorized to meet electronically. This is a committee orientation meeting. Please note that there is no physical location for members of the public to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that all members of the committee and select legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom electronic meeting platform. The public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting by the Zoom platform or by telephone. All necessary access information has been available in the House calendar and through the electronic calendar on the General Court website. The notice for this meeting complies with House rules and RSA 91A. Anyone who has a problem accessing the meeting should call 271-3600 or email hcs@leg.state.nh.us. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. And I want to introduce Pam Smarling for House Committee Research, who is here on the meeting to assist us. She is also our committee researcher for the rest of the session. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting will be done by a roll call vote. We will start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. And when each member states they're present, please also state where you are and whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. Okay. Representative Sytek, if you would call the roll.
Okay.
Thank you.
Somebody just walked in. Representative Curry. Representative Roy.
I'm here alone in my truck.
Representative Roy.
Thank you.
I can't hear Representative Sytek. It's really distorted. I don't know if it's just me.
I can't either.
It's the same for me too.
Okay, John, could you let Pam call the roll? You're extremely distorted.
I'd be happy to take over. I'm sorry, Representative Sytek, your sound just isn't working.
I'm here alone in the room at home.
So should I begin?
I
don't even know if you can hear us.
Yeah, I don't think he hears us either.
Yes.
It may be that the only way to signal him that he can't hear us is to mute him, and when he doesn't get any responses, he'll know.
Okay, so I will mute him and see what he says. Say.
Still trying. So would you like me to resume with the roll call after you have to vote?
I'm sorry, I've got to figure out how.
You should probably start over, Pam.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Representative Sytek, I hope you're hearing this.
All right. I don't know.
I keep hearing something from him, even though he's muted, which is
Yes, which is bizarre.
It is bizarre. Thank you. I'm glad it's not just me. That would really make me worry. All right, I'll go through the roll call from the top. Representative McGuire.
Yes, I'm in,
Yes.
yes, I'm hearing things from Representative Sitek also. But I'm in the LOB cyber room and I'm alone.
Representative Roy,
I am here. I am in my truck alone driving through Bear Brook State Park.
Representative Sitek. Maybe you can, all right.
I hear you.
Okay, we hear you in a very distorted way. So I did hear that, but it's not clear. Representative Pearson.
I am here located in Gary.
I'm here at home. I keep getting muted automatically.
No, it's me muting you because even though you're muted, something is coming through.
Is it
Can
possible
someone,
to come via the
someone call
phone
him?
via video?
I
gave him a call and let him know.
Computer shop.
Hopefully he'll connect by phone, and then that would just be a clearer sound all around. Representative Yakubovich.
Here, alone in the room at home.
Thank you. Representative Lekas.
I'm here at home in my home in Hudson, currently alone. It's possible that at some point Representative Alicia Lekas might walk through.
All right. Representative Allegro.
Allegro, and
Allegro.
that's okay. The I fouls everybody up.
Yeah.
I'm here alone in my home office, enjoying the wonders of modern technology.
Representative Bailey.
I'm here alone in Milton.
Thank you. Representative Lanzara.
I'm here, and I do have some kids on Zoom in the other rooms in the house and things like that. I may have to tend to it.
All right. Representative Sant'Anastaso. I don't see. Representative Goley.
I'm here, home, and my wife will be in and out of the room at times.
Representative Schuett.
At home and alone except for my cat.
Representative Judy is not here. Representative Schmidt.
I am present at my home in Dover and I am alone.
Representative Schultz.
I am present in Concord. My husband will be in and out of the room, as will my cat and my dog.
Representative Fellows.
Home alone.
Representative Fontenot.
I am present. I am home in Rochester, and my wife is also in the building.
Representative Grota.
I'm in my home and my office alone.
And finally, Representative O'Brien.
I am present. I am at home, and I am alone with an occasional grandkid buzzing through.
Okay. So it appears we have a quorum. I've been trying to call Representative Sitek, but he doesn't answer.
He's looking at his phone.
All right, let's try again. See if I can connect. But anyway, this is our first meeting for eDNA this year. And wanted to have us introduce ourselves. and also to let you know what we'll be doing this year. So far, the speaker has not yet decided that what we'll be doing. Hi, John. Well, that's his voicemail. So I'm trying to schedule a public hearing for next week. Next week, it will be entirely remote. They won't let people into the building. And so that'll be a challenge to do it properly. Later on, I believe we will have hybrid meetings. So if anyone, I would expect that as many people as possible should be attending when we get set up. If you will not be attending under any circumstances, let me know online. It's your decision, of course. So anyway, ED&A is generally a fairly busy committee. This is my third term as chair of ED&A. We have currently 45 bills. I expect another 20 to 40 by the time we're finished. And they're generally in 4 different areas. The state retirement system, which affects localities as well because it covers state employees, firemen, police, corrections officers, and teachers throughout the state, and some local employees as well. We have professional licensing, which is, we'll be getting a brief orientation on that this afternoon. The organization of the state government itself. So we've got bills on Department of Information Technology and on the governor's executive powers, both. So we will be covering a lot of that. And what's the 4th area? Oh, administrative rules. We'll have a brief introduction to that tomorrow afternoon, and we'll be glad to answer questions. This committee supplies most members of the Joint Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. And I believe that the staff will be inquiring if you're interested in the near future because we're short of alternates for the House. And I'll start the introduction by saying that I'm in my 7th term. I live in Epsom, and I'm a retired aerospace engineer. And let's see. Mr. Representative Allegro, well, let's go in alphabetical order.
You want a brief introduction to me? Is that it?
Yes, please.
I'm a retired scientist, a cell and molecular biologist. I live in Campton and don't know what to add to that at the moment.
You're muted, Carol.
I hope. Okay, there you go. Representative Bailey.
Well, I work as a reviewer for an online college where I review student projects. I live in Milton. What was that? What else did you want to know?
Anything else that you think is of importance to us?
Guess that's about it.
Okay. Okay. Representative Fellows.
Morning. This is my 2nd term in the legislature, and last year I was also on ED&A. My background is in education. Most of that time was at the Department of Education, and my expertise is school data, school funding, grants, that sort of thing.
Okay. Representative Fontenot.
Good morning, Tim Fontenot from Rochester. This is my 3rd term in the legislature, 2nd on ED&A. I am also a full-time realtor and real estate investor. and also a full-time landlord. So I have a few hats, a few jobs that I wear.
We're glad you can squeeze us in.
Thanks.
Representative Goley?
Good morning. I'm currently serving my 11th term in the House. First 5 terms were on the Labor Committee, 2 of which I chaired. And then the past few terms I've been on eDNA, and I am the past chair on eDNA. I'm just currently retired in November from the Manchester Fire Department as a captain. Served there for 32 and a half years. And glad to be back on eDNA.
Okay, Representative Grota?
Good morning. I'm Jackie Grota. I live in Rye. This is my 2nd term and my 2nd term serving on eDNA. I am a retired chemical engineer, and I serve currently in my town on the Conservation Commission, and I chair the Budget Committee.
Okay, Representative Judy isn't here. Representative Lanzara?
Hi, Lanzara, born and raised in Nashua. I'm a Nashua full-time fireman. A couple of degrees from the University of New Haven. One is arts and investigations. And my father was a state rep back in the 80s. So kind of carrying on this, this will be my first term, but carrying on the family tradition and trying to help New Hampshire.
Okay. Representative Lakis?
Hello, everyone. This is my 2nd term in the legislature. Last year, I was on Municipal and County Government Committee. My background, I've worked for over 40 years as a computer and electrical engineer. I was able to retire a little over a year ago. And I'm down here in Hudson, New Hampshire, where we've lived for, I think, over 36 years now. So I think that's it.
Good. Representative Pearson?
I am Representative Pearson. I am a longtime resident of Derry. My background is I have an engineering degree in fire protection and a master's degree in public administration from Oklahoma State. I currently serve as a lieutenant on the Manchester Fire Department, along with other governmental things that I am involved in. And I'm happy to be returning to eDNA for my 2nd term.
Okay. Representative Roy?
Hello, I'm Representative Roy. I am from Deerfield. I represent Candia, Deerfield, Nottingham, and Northwood. This is my 2nd term in the House. I started off in eDNA. I went to criminal justice. I missed Peter Schmidt so much that I requested I be sent back to eDNA, and I'm back here again. And I'm happy to be back with you guys. It was fun the first time. Let me see. I am retired law enforcement. I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. I'm a 100% disabled veteran. I have some spinal issues I got courtesy of the Army. I am on my municipal budget committee. And other than that, I'm an avid outdoorsman. I love hunting, and that's about it.
Representative Santanastasso? See here.
I see somebody named Becky Benvenuti. Does anybody know who that might be?
Matt was in the as a participant. He's rejoining as a panelist. There he is.
All right, great. So I'm not sure who Becky Benvenuti is, but if you could identify yourself, I don't know how you got here.
Hi, this is Becky Benvenuti. I joined using the public link, and I am with the New Hampshire Municipal Association, but I would be glad to leave the meeting and rejoin using that link again if that would be appropriate. I was I was not connected, and then suddenly the link went out, and I came back in and was connected. So I'm not sure what happened, but
I'm not sure what happened either, but I don't have the option to return you to the attendee list. So if you wouldn't mind signing off and coming back in that way, that would be helpful. Thank you.
I would be very happy to do that.
Thank you.
Hello, Seth Mustafa, is the audio working now?
Yes, Representative Santos-Sasko.
Yep. Oh, hey, how you doing? My first time in the House. Moved to New Hampshire because I think it's the greatest state in the union. I just want to do my part to keep it that way.
Okay. Who's after? All right. Representative Schmidt.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Schmidt. I'm starting my 15th year on ED&A. I previously served a year on E&A, Environment and Agriculture for the newbies, and 3 years before that on the Municipal and County Government Committee. So I have a similar trajectory, if you will, as Representative Lekas, coming over from another committee. I am in my 19th year in the legislature. I represent wards 1 and 2 in Dover. And in the House, I serve also on the Assessing Standards Board for about 15 years now. I'm also on the Joint Committee on Employee Classification. I've served on that for about 10 years along with Representative Sitek. I'm also on the Vital Records Privacy Board as the Secretary of State's designee, and my background is in foreign languages in terms of my university degrees. I'm delighted to have Representative Roy back because I always need somebody that can give me a certain sense of security in case we have a disturbance, because Terry is big enough to intimidate just about anybody who's not playing defensive line in the NFL.
Thank you, Representative Schmidt. That's Representative Schuett.
Thank you. I'll just point out that going alphabetically, we seem to have skipped Representative O'Brien. I don't want him to feel left out.
You're so right. I'm having a little difficulty with the alphabet this morning. It's my fault.
That's okay. I think he would have come right after you. So, and you went first. So anyway, my name's Diane Schuett. I represent Chichester and Pembroke. And this is my 5th term in the legislature, although previously I put in 25 years and retired after working in the House Clerk's office. So I'm very familiar with the buildings and the process. This is my, I believe, my 4th term on ED&A. I've served 2 terms as vice chair. I've also served on municipal and county government, labor and legislative administration. And I'm not sure, I get still on the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. I have not received an official appointment notice, but they keep notifying me. So I guess still on that.
You're listed on the sign-in sheet as an alternate, but if you haven't gotten an appointment letter, you should tell the speaker.
Yeah.
But we want you. Not.
Thanks.
Okay. Skipping back to Representative O'Brien.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And I don't mind being skipped. Patience is a virtue, so no problem. I'm Michael O'Brien. I'm retired. My occupation was I worked as a firefighter for the city of Nashua, and I retired with the rank of deputy fire chief. My experience in the House, I think this is my 8th or 9th term. I got to do the math on that. But I had the honor of being most of my career with the state was on the Transportation Committee, where I had the honor to serve 3 times as Vice Chair of Transportation. I'm currently now a member also of the City of Nashua Board of Aldermen, and I currently also serve as Vice President of the Board. I'm on the committees of Chairman of Infrastructure. I'm on the Budget, Finance, and the Pennachuck Water Committee. So it keeps me busy.
That's for sure. All right, Representative Schultz.
Hi, this is my 4th year as a state rep. I came in from a special election. I love our committee. We get so many interesting bills. And I've enjoyed serving with everybody and look forward to serving with the new folks. I'm currently furloughed from my job with the New Hampshire Bible Society. So I'm actually looking for more remote work on communications and outreach for nonprofits. Before that, I was a Democratic operative and served for some years for a variety of congressmen on Capitol Hill. So glad to be with you guys.
Okay. Representative Sytek, can we hear him?
Yeah.
Now you're now.
How distorted am I?
Very distorted.
I'm still distorted.
Have you dialed in? It looks like your phone.
Going once.
It looks like your phone, Representative Sytek.
Yes, I have, but you can't hear the phone. It's up against my thigh.
I can allow you to talk through your phone if you want to try that.
I have to shut the phone off.
You have to hit *6. Your phone is muted currently, but
let's try that.
But if you
My name's Cy. Are you? Oh God!
Bob, you're getting feedback between your phone and your computer.
Yeah, I want to.
Hello.
Tell you what. Why don't I just get?
*6.
There, I'm out of.
I'm out of.
Oh no, I'm not.
Oh no, I'm not. Oh no, I'm not. Oh no, I'm not. Oh no, I'm not.
Away from your computer. Step away from your computer.
Hi everyone. I've left the meeting. My next stop is the computer store to get try to get a camera, a good camera, instead of this Lenovo thing that I'm on. Jeff, you actually retired? When did 32 years? Have you been? When did you start? When you were 8 years old?
No,
that's amazing. You didn't invite me to the party either. All right, I'm John Sytek. I represent Salem, Barely, New Hampshire. I was in for 3 terms in the 90s. This is starting my 6th term now. I'm starting to get the hang of all this. I've all of my time's been on ED&A, which is a wonderful committee. You see everything. Actually, I'm a semi-retired, mostly retired school teacher. I gave a test this morning. The kids suck. I got to give a retest. It was terrible. I'm a bail commissioner. On JCEC along with Representative Schmidt. I town treasurer in Salem. I like to collect minor offices, and that's who I am. Oh, I'm as I said, mostly retired school teacher. I had an engineering background, which I occasionally use. Thank you.
And if we're ever in need of a witty comment, John supplies it.
Okay. Representative Kubovich.
Hi, Michael Yakubovich from Hooksett. Second term, glad to be back on the committee. Computer engineer by trade and education.
Excellent. This is going to be a very strange year because, as I said, we will be working remotely for at least the next couple of weeks. I hope we will be able to get at least into a hybrid situation, but I haven't seen it. And most of my comments would only apply if we're in the LOB, so I don't have anything more to say. Are there any questions?
Madam Chair, you did mention at the beginning that you were hopeful that we could get back to a more normal type of meeting. And if that happens, I just want to be sure, are you going to mandate that everyone wears a mask if we're meeting in the LOB?
That's not something for me to do. That's something for the speaker and the House and committee services. I believe that will be the case.
Thank you.
We will definitely be spread. From what I understand, we will be spread out in a double room with only the committee and the staff and possibly one person from one of the agencies with us. So we'll have plenty of room. They've got extra air filtration systems that they're working on installing in the LOB because the current air system is not adequate, and masks will be mandated as far as I know.
Yes, I believe that's a policy that's been adopted by the Facilities Committee and is in place now, that throughout the complex, masks are required.
Thank you.
Okay. What else? All right, and I sent everyone a welcoming notice with the subcommittee assignments because we do most of our detail work in subcommittee, and I like to have standing subcommittees so that you get to know the areas. I mean, knowing a lot about administrative rules doesn't necessarily mean you know anything about licensing. And so you get to work on a group of bills that are on the same topic. So,
can I just ask a quick question and just let you know that my name is Pam Smarling. You can see it on the screen, of course, and you've all gotten emails from me. I'm the researcher for the committee and helping as a resource for all kinds of things, you know, beyond resource, especially in this beyond research, especially in the Zoom age. And one question that I want to just ask is, does everybody know how to raise their hand electronically? Does anybody have a question about that? That really is, I know I just chimed in without raising my hand and I apologize, but in general, that helps the meeting.
All right, looks like everybody's raising their. And someone has a bit of feedback.
Yes. I think it was Representative Sytek. I have muted you, Representative Sytek.
If you could tell John that on his computer, there should be a mute button on his computer, that if he mutes the computer, then he can just use the phone and he won't get that feedback.
He should be able to hear you.
He's looking for it. Okay.
Turn off your speakers.
Okay,
The other item I would just briefly mention while we're in a sort of interim period here is that all of the meetings are recorded and live streamed on YouTube. So if you should miss a meeting, that's one of the benefits of the remote meetings. You can go on to the New Hampshire House of Representatives committee streaming YouTube site and see anything that you may have missed.
The other thing is that all of our committee meetings are open to the public and have to comply with the right to know laws. So that you cannot you cannot talk about committee business if you have a quorum of the committee present on a email chain or a phone call or Zoom or whatever, unless you all happen to be of one party, in which case it's a caucus. Which is allowed without being open to the public. Okay.
And I will add that the chat feature has intentionally been, taken off of this meeting. So if you're looking for it, you won't find it.
And that is deliberate to comply with right to know.
Exactly. That would have had to be, printed out and included in the committee file in a chat, and it just seems simpler to allow people to communicate if they wanted to by text or email or some other way during the meeting, but not through.
Representative Schultz, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for offering the remote option, because I was hospitalized with a regular flu at this time last year and missed orientation. And I just wanted to thank you for making that an option for us as we continue to maneuver around COVID. I just appreciate that very much.
All right, Representative Pearson.
Yeah, have we identified the other phone number that's on this panel? The one that ends in 036?
Yes. All right, let's ask that person to unmute and say who they are.
*6 is the unmute for phones.
Pam, can you unmute them?
I can only ask to unmute, and I have asked the person to unmute, but in order to do that, they need to hit *6. And that's as much as I can do.
Yep. Well, in the meantime, Representative Fellows.
Yes, I can't seem to find the email with the subcommittee assignments. Can you tell me what mine is?
Sure.
Or what they are, what they are, and which one I'm on.
Okay, yes. Let me get the right page. All right. Okay, we have the Committee on Licensing, which Representative Pearson is the chair, and that has Representative Allegro, Schmidt, and Schuett as well, and Santonastasso. All right, the Committee on Executive Orders and Government Organization, Representative Roy is the chair and has Representative Broda, Lanzara, Likas, and Schultz. Representative Yakubovich is the head of the Pension Subcommittee, and that has Representatives Bailey, Fellows, Goley, and Representative Roy is a second assignment. And then Representative Sytek is the chair of the Subcommittee on Rules, which has myself, Representative O'Brien, Representative Fontenot, and Representative Judy.
Thank you.
Okay. And Pam, do you think you could post that somewhere on our committee webpage? Because we'll be using those subcommittees even on things that don't seem to fit into their or normal definition if it needs subcommittee work.
I can inquire about that. I mean, I've never posted anything on the committee webpage before. That's not a practice, but under new, under our current.
Yeah, usually I post it on the file cabinet in the committee room, but that's not going to be open.
It's on the bulletin board, but now we have a sort of, and we need a virtual.
We need a bulletin board, right? Representative Lekas?
Just wanted to say the name is Lekas, L-E-T, and that's what happens when you import names from another country that uses a different alphabet, and sometimes it doesn't work quite well, I understand, but it's Lekas with the E like let. Thank you.
I apologize for mispronouncing it for the last 15 years.
Yeah, no needs. I thought starting out I'd see what I could do, but I don't get offended.
All right, well, thank you for that, and I will do my best. Representative Fontenot?
I just wanted to mention that I too did not seem to get an email with the subcommittee assignments, so just want to make sure they have my correct email on file or what have you.
Yes, well, I did that from what I collected the emails from the state website, so it's what you had last year or last session, and if you're not, please do make sure that Pam has your current and correct email, so that that's something that the clerk has asked, that we all have one email we use for legislative business, and make sure everybody knows about it. I'll get an updated list from Pam.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, it being 9:45, don't see any other hands up, so we should invite Mr. Carlin from the retirement system to give us an introduction to retirement system.
Madam Chair, John Sytek's trying to get a hold of you here.
Representative Sytek, yes.
Can I be so bold? Can you just simply re-email the list? I mean, why go through all this contortions? Just send it.
Are you asking to have the committee assignments re-emailed to the entire committee? You're breaking up again. Or were you asking something else?
Please.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Chairman, what he's asking for that.
Yes, please, resend.
Yes, sir. We will do so. All right. So I will ask Mr. Carlin.
I've brought Mr. Carlin over. And if there are others from the retirement system that like to be promoted to panelists, if you would just raise your hands is probably the easiest way, or Marty can tell us who.
Hi, Pam. This is Marty Carlin. If you can please let into the meeting as panelist George Lagos, Larry Johansson, Tim Crutchfield, and Gerard Murphy.
They are all on the way, if not here.
Just as an FYI, it took about 30 seconds for me to rejoin.
I know, I was afraid you had, I had removed you inadvertently. I was really worried. Here they come. It does seem to be taking longer than usual. And where is George?
I'm on.
Oh, good. Great.
It looks like all of my colleagues are here, so I'll start out. My name is Marty Carlin, and I'm the Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs at NHRS. Familiar face to many of the veteran members of this committee. I've been been here since the 2011 legislative session, so coming up on 10 years now. We're going to share the presentation, among different staff because we have the opportunity to do that on Zoom. So the subject matter experts for different areas will be able to address some of the slides we have. Typically, this is an in-person presentation, and we bring handouts over for the committee. Obviously, that's not possible this year, but I did send Pam an email that she can forward to the full committee with links to a number of NHRS-related documents available online, our annual reports, some frequently asked questions about topics in the news, a link to our RSA 100A and other issue information. So, and also I sent Pam a copy of the slide presentation that we'll be giving today to circulate to the committee as well. If anyone has any questions, throughout the session, please reach out to me. I'd be glad to help you out, whether it's a legislative question or a question that you receive from a constituent. I'm not sure how questions will be handled this time. If people will be raising their hands and Pam will let them in, or if the committee prefers, we can stop after different sections and take questions then.
Why don't you do that? Pause for a bit and ask questions before you move on to a different topic, because I'm sure there will be a number.
Very good, thank you. And I'm going to turn it over now to George Lagos. He's the Executive Director of the Retirement System, and he'll just have some introductory remarks and introduce the rest of the NHRS staff on the call.
Thank you, Marty. I'm George Lagos, as Marty indicated. Pleasure to see you all. As Marty indicated, we're going to go about this a little differently this year. In the past, I've done most, if not all, the presentation. So joining us today is, of course, Marty, who's our Director of Communication and Legislative Affairs. Tim Crutchfield, who's our Deputy Director and Chief Legal Counsel. Gerard Murphy, who's the Director of Finance, and Larry Johansson, who's the Director of Investments. So they'll all be having different segments. And as you can see, here's the ground we're going to cover. And if I may, Madam Chair, we're starting a little later than perhaps anticipated. I'd just like to know if you could tell us how much time, if you have a limitation in mind. We have about 33 slides here, so I just want everybody to be mindful of your time.
We've blocked out the morning for it, and we will be breaking for lunch when we're done. So I believe the total period will depend on the questions as much as anything.
Okay. Well, I'll please feel free to let us know if you'd like us to move things along. It's one of those things where we don't want to rush past items, but obviously some of these things are quite complex and we could spend a lot more time. So we'll keep that schedule in mind. So here's the ground we're going to cover today. Marty is going to be discussing membership. Tim Crutchfield will cover benefits. Larry will do investments. Gerard and I will split up the contribution and funding section. Marty's back on for legislation, and then we have a very brief summary slide. So with that, Marty, it's over to you, I believe.
Thank you, George. Is everyone seeing the slides that I'm sharing, or is anyone not seeing them? I guess is probably a better question. So some of this, again, for veteran committee members is going to be basic, but I know we have some newcomers. So NHRS is a contributory multi-employer defined benefit plan that was established in 1967 when separate retirement plans for teachers, police, fire, and state employees were merged. Contributory means that both the member and the employer contribute into the plan. A multi-employer plan represents the fact that the costs are shared collectively among all the participating employers. Some states have what are called agent plans, where each municipality has its own essentially separate retirement plan and separate cost structure. New Hampshire is a multi-employer plan, so it's statewide. We provide retirement, disability, and death benefits, as well as a post-retirement medical subsidy to eligible members and beneficiaries. Once someone attains eligibility through vesting, they can receive a guaranteed lifetime pension. The vesting period is 10 years in New Hampshire, or if you are working at or beyond your normal retirement age, which is 60. Our pension benefits are funded through employee and employer contributions and investment income on those contributions. Investment returns have historically provided the majority of funding for pension benefits over the course of the system's history. NHRS isn't a state agency per se, like a Department of Safety or Department of Ed. We're what's referred to as a component unit of state government. So we're not directly under the executive branch. We're overseen by a board of trustees, 13 members, which include active participating members of the retirement system, representatives of state, local, county, and school employers, 4 members of the public, and the state treasurer. Our board are fiduciaries, which means they are charged with acting in the best interest of the benefits and participants of the plan. We also have an independent investment committee, which we'll get into more detail on later, and they are also fiduciaries. The legislature is the plan sponsor, and our law or plan document is RSA 100A. Staff is here to implement the statute as well as administrative rules, board policies. And besides the state and internal controls on the retirement system, we also have to be cognizant of the Internal Revenue Code to maintain the tax exempt status of the fund. So different layers of regulation sort of govern what we can and can't do. In addition to RSA 100A, there is an article in the New Hampshire Constitution. In Part 1, it's Article 36A, and among other things, it protects the funds in the trust for the exclusive purpose of providing benefits. It requires the board to certify employer contribution rates based on sound actuarial practice, and it requires employees to pay the rates as certified. 36A was adopted back in 1984. Our trustees, as I said, have a fiduciary obligation to ensure that the plan is adequately funded. This is sort of a actuarial pension plan 101 graphic representation of the equation. Contributions and investment income coming into the trust fund need to equal benefit payments and expenses going out. And this is a long-term equation. This isn't a year-over-year balance. And these are not to scale expenses or a fraction of the benefit payments that go out. But it's a simplified graphic. Our trust fund at the close of fiscal 20, June 30th, was at $9.134 billion. And the next slide will just sort of show the change in trust fund assets over the past 11 years. We've seen some dips, but steady progress. And over this time, while the trust fund has grown from a little bit under 5 billion to a little bit over 9, we've also paid out about $6 billion in pension benefits. Some recent initiatives that I want the committee to be aware of is we've always had a focus on cybersecurity and data protection, but it's become more enhanced as the threat levels grow over time. We've seen what's happened with the federal government with the hacking issue. So, we are really working to train all of our staff to be vigilant for suspicious emails and other backdoor ways into the system, and enhancing protection of data and identity authentication for folks contacting us for benefit information. We've also, over the last few years, have been working to enhance our education and outreach for members, employers, and members of the public. We've got various social media channels and a YouTube channel with NHRS presentations, and we try to get out and tell our story to anyone who wants to listen. Internally, we're in the middle of a pension application system upgrade. The product is called Pension Gold, or PG, and we're upgrading from version 2 to version 3. This is essentially the brain of the retirement systems in terms of benefit application. So this is a significant upgrade that's moving in phases over a period of years. We started in January of 19, and we're about a third of the way through the project. The system that we're upgrading from was put in 2003, 2004, and a lot of the server and other pieces of it are sort of reaching end of life. So it's moving within a product within the same vendor, but still quite a challenge. Another new initiative is we just launched a contact center last month to sort of streamline calls from members and retirees in order to get them the information without sort of a phone tag or being locked in voicemail. So that's proceeding well so far. And finally, we're searching for a new executive director. I know George will talk about this later, but George is retiring from the retirement system at the end of next month. He announced that back in the fall, and that search is ongoing. And this is my last slide for this section. This is just sort of an overview of some significant developments since 2007. And it's, why 2007? It's 14 years ago, but this is really the beginning of the rebuild, if you will, for the New Hampshire retirement system, and the recognition among policy members and others that changes had to be made to strengthen the system and keep it viable going forward. One of the biggest changes was a change in the actuarial methodology that was adopted in statute in 2007. We'll get kind of into the history of the unfunded liability of the pension system later, but there was an actuarial methodology adopted in the early 90s that really overvalued the plan, and we weren't collecting the employer contributions we should for an extended period. So that was fixed in 2007. The legislature created an independent investment committee which has performed better than peers over the last 11 years since it was formed. Legislature put in a 30-year amortization of our unfunded liability. The board, in a few instances over the years, has reduced our assumed rate of investment return, which is a key driver of future costs and liabilities, but they were ratcheting it downward to sort of reflect reality in the markets. That's happened a few times. 2011, again, that was my first year here. House Bill 2 was a significant change to the retirement system. It was originally a standalone bill, but was folded into House Bill 2 in 2011. Did everything from increasing member contributions, which are set in statute, reduced benefit accruals and benefit formulas for non-vested members and future hires, changes the composition of our board, eliminated the state employer contribution subsidy to local employers, and made many other changes. Some of those benefit and contribution changes were challenged in court, both by labor groups and by employers in regard to the state subsidy. And in all of those cases, the New Hampshire Supreme Court, in a series of decisions, upheld the legislative changes and introduced into New Hampshire law the unmistakability doctrine, which states that if there wasn't a unmistakable intent of the legislature in enacting legislation, future legislatures are allowed to change it prospectively. And in 2017, there was what was called the Decennial Commission. This was put into law back in 2007 as part of the pension changes. And it's a 10-year look back at the retirement system on a panel consisting of representatives from the House and Senate, employers, members, retirees, and members of the public. I believe Chair McGuire was on the Decennial Commission. And it was sort of a 360 review, went on for months, and there's a lengthy report available on the General Court website under the committee documents for this. It was a very thorough review of the retirement system, and a number of recommendations were made, several of which were enacted into law as is or as modified, through the legislative process. Generally speaking, the commission found that NHRS was on the right track. Our costs were reasonable compared to other plans around the country, and our assumptions were among the more conservative at the time. The commission also hired the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College to do an independent review and make recommendations for the retirement system, and that sort of echoed the same findings. And then finally, this past summer, the board reduced our assumed rate of return to 6.75, and we'll address that in greater detail in the funding and contribution section that George and Gerard are covering. So at this point, I'm done for a little while, and I'm going to be turning it over to Tim Crutchfield to talk about membership and benefits. So I'd be glad to take any questions on anything that's come up so far.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Would you repeat the mistakability doctrine business?
Yeah, the unmistakability doctrine. Other states have adopted it as well, but the New Hampshire Supreme Court introduced it into New Hampshire jurisprudence. It basically says that unless there was an unmistakable intent in the legislation that legislature did not want that change going forward, future legislatures had the right to modify plan provisions.
Okay, good enough.
Marty, how much, by lowering the assumed rate of return from 7.25 to 6.75, can you tell me what the effect was on the unfunded accrued liability with that change?
Yep, that change and others that were adopted in conjunction with it, such as payroll growth and demographic changes, added about $900 million to the unfunded liability. The lowering of the assumed rate of return was by far the largest component of the increase, but there were other changes that added up together to make it $900 million.
10%.
Don't see any other questions, so if we could.
Okay, I'll turn it over to Tim Crutchfield, our Deputy Director.
Thank you, Marty. Members of the committee, it's nice to see you again. Over the last 20 years, I've had the opportunity to appear before the committee numerous times, and it's always good to see some familiar faces, and congratulations to the new members of the committee as well. I'm going to address the next 5 slides regarding membership and benefits and enrollment numbers and so forth, and hopefully, at least for the returning committee members, some of these terms and numbers and facts and figures will look familiar, and I'm certainly happy to take questions along the way. Starting out, by statute, NHRS has broken the 4 member classifications into 2 groups. Group 1 being employees and teachers, and Group 2 being police and fire. The teacher group, the fire group, and the police group are all mandatory participants, again, by statute. The employee groups can join NHRS if their participating employer elects it, and certainly most of them have. So if you have, a town or a city, all their 4 member classifications within those 2 groups belong to NHRS as active members. And as I said, if you work full-time, that membership is mandatory. There are exceptions to the rules and to the laws, as most of you know. So I'm just going to address the general terms of membership and benefits. So under the bullet regarding the participating employers, as you can see, there are 461 participating employers, everything from the state being the largest with about 11,000 participants to small and tiny water districts and governmental entities that only have 2 or 3 members. So it runs the gamut. Moving on to slide 10, this shows some of the membership numbers between those 4 member classes. As you can see, the employee class makes up a little more than 50% of our current total membership of about 48,000 active members. In the teacher group, it's interesting, as you probably know, that's a group that is declining in terms of its demographics and its membership numbers, with the enrollments of students declining across the state. Police and fire make up relatively small percentages of the membership. With police, it just a little less than 5%, and fire only about 2%. And you can see the retirees, those numbers there as well. I will say that over the last 7 years or so, that active membership of about 48,000 has remained relatively stable. While the retiree group, naturally, we get more retirees every year, and with folks living longer, the number of retirees and beneficiaries has increased. I will reference a few slides during my presentation that are in the appendix that you may want to refer to. In terms of the information on this slide, I'll note that appendix slide 38 provides a 10-year trend of the numbers of both members and beneficiaries. Interestingly, Marty spoke about how in 1967, NHRS was created by the legislature by merging 4 different retirement system plans. And that first year, there were 12,000 participants and 36, yes, only 36 beneficiaries in 1967. So the numbers have increased significantly. And one thing that's I noted in listening to the bios of the committee members during the introductions is I think it proves that there aren't 6 degrees of separation here in New Hampshire between folks that have an impact, have a vested interest in NHRS and the lives it touches. So it's we joke around the office that instead of 6 degrees of separation, there's probably only about 2. You can also see the average age of our active participants and the average age of our beneficiaries. And one thing I did want to point out is that average benefit of less than $21,000. I mean, sometimes the headlines are the 6-figure annuities or benefits, but the average of all those almost 40,000 people, the average of less than $21,000, I think would be modest by almost any standard. Moving on to slide 11, you can see the numbers there of the financial impact and outlay of the retirement system. I just want to join the first slide and the third slide. So the 816, almost $17 million in benefits paid out, 80% of that stays in New Hampshire. So I know my colleagues are always leery of me doing lawyer math, but that's over $650 million that stays in the state of New Hampshire and has a significant impact on the New Hampshire economy. The middle bullet talks about a medical subsidy benefit. That's a benefit available to essentially a closed pool of retirees that pays a stipend, if you will, toward health insurance that's offered through retirees' former employers. There are about 10,000 retirees and beneficiaries that are covered under the medical subsidy now. And as I said, it's a closed group. State employees had to have retired by July of 2004. Teachers and political retirees had to retire by July of 2009. And they're for group 2s, police and fire, they had to be active or retired by June of 2000. So again, that number of about 10,000 folks now will only get smaller as time goes on. Moving on now to slide 12, the 4 types of retirement. Service is by far the largest number of annuities that we pay out, but we also offer a disability benefit, and that's broken into 2 different types. One is work-related. If you get hurt on the job, as we refer to it as accidental disability retirement. And then there's ordinary disability retirement. You get sick or injured outside the workforce. There's early retirement, which is a combination of years of service and age. I don't want to get too far down in the weeds, but if you have, say you're 50 years old and you have 30 years of service as a teacher, you could qualify for what's referred to as an early service retirement, which would normally be age 60 for the normal retirement age. For those folks that do elect for early service retirement, there is a reduction by taking early service as opposed to waiting until age 60. Vested deferred retirement refers to a point in time in which a member qualifies for a benefit, but they leave their participating employer before they actually retire. So perhaps they have 20 years of service, but they leave and take another position with a non-participating employer. So they have preserved the right to that benefit. And when they get to age 60 or later in most cases, and they want to utilize it, then they can then apply for that vested deferred retirement benefit. The next bullet refers to the different benefit provisions for the two groups. Again, group one, employees and teachers, group two, police and fire. And a large part of the different benefit provisions have to do with the fact that group two members do not have access to Social Security in New Hampshire. So you'll see some slides later on that shows the average group two benefit is higher than those for group one, but in large part it's to make up for the lack of Social Security, as well as they typically have a shorter work history due to the dangerous level of public safety. The next bullet speaks to the different benefit provisions based on vested by or hired by date. Again, vested in our terminology means at that point in which you're entitled to a benefit. Now, Marty mentioned HB2 back in 2011. That established essentially two tiers of benefits for both groups in NHRS. And it depends on if members were vested by 1/1/12 or hired prior to 7/1/11. And that created the two tiers. There are different formulas for the benefits between group one and group two. Again, I'll refer to the appendix under slide 40. It talks about or gives an example of a typical group one benefit. Slide 41 gives an example of a typical group two benefit by the different components of what makes up a benefit. The months of creditable service, the average final compensation, and the benefit multiplier. The creditable service is counted in terms of months for NHRS participants. And again, going back to that hired by or vested by date, the average final compensation is either based on an average of your high 3 years or your high 5 years. And again, those slides 40 and 41 will give you an example of that. Moving now to slide 13. Again, I spoke earlier of the relatively modest benefits that NHRS pays its retirees and beneficiaries. I think the numbers are right there for you. Again, the police and fire jump out in terms of the group one as being higher, but again, they typically have a shorter work history and they are not entitled to Social Security. The note on the automatic cost of living adjustments is interesting because those cost of living or COLA adjustments are granted by the legislature. Last year, a COLA was granted for the first time since 2010. That was 1.5% up to the first $50,000 of a benefit. So it was a maximum of $750. Folks had to be retired since 7/1/14. So that impacted about 30,000 out of the almost 40,000 retirees were then eligible for the COLA. It was phased in beginning this past August based on participants' retirement month. And so August through next July is how this coming July is how the COLAs will be paid. And the COLA was funded through employer contributions over the next 20 years at a cost of about $67 million through the general fund. Moving on to slide 14, my last slide. Again, I spoke briefly about perhaps the rare six-figure benefits get the headlines, but as you can see, the vast majority of our retirees and beneficiaries aren't getting rich on their NHRS retirements. With 28% or about 11,000 of our 39,000 make less than $10,000 a year in their retirement annuity. 2/3 are under $25,000 and 94% make less than the 50,000. So again, they work, they earn it, they're not getting rich by their retirement benefit, but an average benefit of less than $21,000. that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions before turning it over to Larry Johansson to discuss investments.
Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Tim, for your presentation. Good to see you again. I'm wondering, I recall during the time roughly at the very beginning of the restructuring of the retirement system that was undertaken as a result of House Bill, what was it, 683 or something like that, that got into a whole series of the decisions that had been taken back in the 90s that had resulted in kind of a devastating diminution of the trust fund corpus, and some unsustainable long-term programs given the financial status of the retirement system. So the COLAs and the healthcare subsidies, which were basically kind of discontinued, except for the healthcare benefit, which was continued for those people that were contractually entitled to it. But there were a lot of people that came and testified with regard to their status and so forth. And I remember seeing a lot of those people. Many of them had been retired for many years and were the red hat ladies, you probably saw them yourself, who came in. And a lot of those people were in their high 80s and 90s and some even older, who had been retired for decades, but they also had been working at a time when their earnings were very, very low. So the figure that on the screen that you're showing us, the annual benefit under $10,000, 28% of the people. So is that basically those are the people who've been in the retirement system for, in many cases, decades now? Many of them would have passed away in the meantime, but others, have aged into that status. So these are people who actually had very, very low earnings. Was that not the case? And that so that the figure of under $10,000 it has to be understood in terms of who those people are. Is that not correct?
Thank you, Representative Schmidt. I would offer a little different perspective that certainly there probably are a few much older folks who worked a traditional working career, but because of the earnings at that time resulted in a very low pension. But more likely, I suggest that the $10,000 a year or less are folks who didn't have a long career, didn't have a 30-year teacher career or a 20-year public safety career, that perhaps they only worked 5 or 6 years, but they kept their money in, and then then when they aged into it, age 60 or 65 as the case may be, they started collecting it. So I would suggest it's probably more representative of a fewer years of service than a traditional long working career at a low wage.
I think that's very helpful to make that distinction. Because the brand new members of the committee who are seeing all this information for the first time will have a hard time understanding that. Now, how are you going to help all of us try to recover from 6 months of enforced absence and inactivity in the legislature to deal with these situations, and the people who are brand new, unless they're in the retirement system themselves, I don't have any knowledge of this. Is there going to be some manuals and so forth so people can study this in more detail? Is that going to be provided to the committee members?
We certainly can, and I'll defer to both Marty and George, but we'll make this information and certainly this presentation on the slides available if we haven't already, immediately following the conclusion of today's meeting. And anytime there's a question from any of you, we're happy to answer it and provide the information in whatever form you deem best.
Representative Schmidt, this is Marty Carlin. If I can jump in, I think I might have mentioned this while Tim was transitioning into the participant phase. But I did send Pam a series of links to all of our annual financial reports and some other handouts and supplemental material that would be useful background for the committee to look at. And we can definitely, if there's additional information that's available, we can provide that on request. But I would point out the annual financial report has a lot of data in it. It's unlike a sort of a news article with an inverted pyramid. All the better information in the annual report is towards the back. It's all sort of the statistical and data information. It's formatted in such a way that to meet the accounting standards. The summary financial report is only about 10 pages, and that's a really quick reference to a lot of high-level information on the retirement system, and I'd recommend checking that out as well.
Thank you very much. It's helpful.
Representative.
I'm sorry, I lost audio. Were you calling on me?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, your hand up.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out to the new members of the committee, if you go on to the New Hampshire Retirement System website, there's a lot of information available there also, and that will show you what employees and employees have access regarding the retirement system also. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Schuett. I don't want to sound like a telemarketer, but www.nhrs.org.
Thank you very much. No further hands, so please continue.
Yes, wait, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Representative Sytek, please ask your.
Chris, if you're talking about people getting an average benefit of under 10K, you said, I thought I heard you say people who have left their money in for only 4 or 5 years and left. I thought you needed to stay 10 years to get vested. Or that is, if you're 10 years, you just get your money back.
If you stayed less than 10, you could get your money back. If you stay 10, that's typically the magic figure for many folks who are participating now, that they would then become vested, i.e. entitled to a benefit. The other way to be vested and be entitled to a benefit is to age in, meaning if you started a career or a second career for a participating employer at age 55, for example, and you worked until age 60, by hitting age 60, even though you only had 5 years of service, you would also be entitled to a benefit.
So this would not work for somebody who is 20 years old and left there 5 years.
Correct. They would not be entitled to a benefit.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, and it's good to be here with the committee. I'm going to cover the next 5 slides. The investment program at the New Hampshire Retirement System. At a very high level, the responsibilities is broadly distributed between the Board of Trustees, a 13-member board representing employers, members, taxpayers. They actually approve the investment policy, including the asset allocation, and hire the investment consultant, both of which based upon recommendations of the Independent Investment Committee. The Independent Investment Committee, created by statute out of the first commission in 2007, became effective January 1 of 2009. As I mentioned, they recommend the investment policy to the board. Essentially, they implement that investment policy. They oversee all of the investments of the retirement system. They hire the service providers, the asset managers. They hire the consultants or the custodian rather, and they prepare, as was alluded to earlier, a comprehensive annual investment report that was just finished and is posted on our website. In appendix on slide 36 is a list of the current members of the investment committee. It's a 6-member committee, 2 from the board, appointed by the board chair, 3 independent members, and then a member who is a member of the retirement system. On the next slide, this is our asset allocation. We look at this continuously. We have a very long-term horizon, 25 plus years. You think about a new member of the retirement system, 20 years plus or minus, retires at 65, and then lives another 20 plus years in retirement. That's a very long-term horizon. We continuously manage risk and liquidity. One of the things that we did when the pandemic first started is managed our cash needs over a 90-day basis as opposed to a 30-day basis. We have a modest negative cash flow in the retirement system, meaning that when you add up all of the member and employer contributions, that's slightly less than the benefit payments that are paid. So we need to manage that very carefully. When the pandemic first started and the economic impact, and you will all recall the significant downturn in March of last year, we wanted to make sure that we had sufficient cash to meet benefit payments every month. It's a well-diversified portfolio. You can see that all of the asset classes are close to targets and well within the range. As part of the asset allocation that the board adopts, recommended by the investment committee, there's a target allocation, but then a range around that, so you're not doing a round trip to try to get back to within a very narrow range. On the next slide, these are our returns at June 30. Obviously, the one-year return was dramatically impacted by the economic impact of the pandemic, primarily in the first quarter of 2020. But there was some recovery in the second quarter, but not complete. Longer term returns are listed here. I would point out that at the board meeting yesterday, we reviewed performance through November 30th. The performance has dramatically rebounded since the end of the fiscal year, 14.2% for the 5 months ending November 30th. And then on a longer term basis for 3 years, 7.1, 5 years, 8.7, and 10 years, 8.6. So the economic impact for the first 2 quarters of 2020 have turned around significantly. Again, the assumed rate of return is 6.75. Over the long term, we want to exceed that. Next slide, please. This is the annual returns over long periods of time. One of the things that this slide is very helpful in pointing out is why we do asset smoothing over 5 years. The rate setting valuations are in the odd year. If we didn't smooth, the valuation as of 2009 would have resulted in a dramatic increase in employer contribution rates. And then 2 years later in 2011, with that very spike in positive performance, obviously those employer rates would have dropped dramatically. So the smoothing helps keep contribution rates relatively stable over time. Next slide, please. One of the things Marty alluded to earlier is the development of the Independent Investment Committee, dramatically improved performance for the retirement system since its inception. Over the past 10 years, our investment performance has been better than 74% of our peers, meaning we're almost in the top quartile. Since the inception, the investment committee has created approximately $270 million more than had we earned the average return of the peers. One other slide I would point to you in the appendix is slide 42. In addition to managing the assets, we are very cognizant of managing our expenses. Slide 42 demonstrates that our expenses on investments are dramatically less than peers. It also demonstrates that our administrative expenses, the cost of running the retirement system, are dramatically less than peers. Before I turn this over to Gerard for the next set of slides, are there any questions from the members of the committee?
Yes, I had my hand raised. This is Representative Schuett. I'm curious, you mentioned the specific return for the first quarter of 2020. What was the return for the second quarter? And was that just for the, or was that for the first 6 months? And what was the actual percentage?
I don't have that, Representative, off the top of my head. The return for the first quarter of 2020 was a negative return. It was slightly positive for the second quarter of 2020. The total return for the fiscal year was 1.1, but as a follow-up, we can certainly send the committee that information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Johansson, please do send us that information, because the way the markets have been whipsawed, we're interested to see what's going on.
Sure.
Representative Pearson had a.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I get into this, can you repeat that number that you said? Was it 14.2%? I wrote down end of November 30th. Is that?
That's for the 5 months ending November 30th.
Okay. So my question is this, because my concern is with the investment committee. My understanding is it used to meet quarterly. That changed to a more frequent time period. The actions in the market, and to give you a bit of my background on that, so where I'm coming from is my frame of reference. I had a talking baby on a television convince me to download an app 8 years ago and start investing in my spare time. I by no means am someone that is qualified to give anybody any investing advice, okay? But me goofing around has pulled easily double-digit numbers, over this time period, and in doing a little, personal investing in, just like I said, very rudimentary amateur stuff. Looking at the way the market moved, the market didn't fall off a cliff. The market slid from December of 19 through April and May. Now, with the New Hampshire retirement system having an investment committee and having paid professionals looking at the allocation of assets within the retirement system, what moves did the retirement system make while that slide was occurring? Because if we just sat there and watched it happen, I got a 10-year-old nephew that can do that. We're paying professionals to make moves in reaction to what is currently happening. And I think the question that really needs to be answered is what moves were made so you can help restore some confidence in this committee, that the investment committee is actually doing anything.
First, the investment committee, as I mentioned, was created in January 1 of 2009. They have met monthly since their creation. So the committee meets every month. Second, the committee sets based upon, they recommend the asset allocation to the board, and the committee and the board are long-term investors. The problem that happens with an attempt at market timing is you have to get both decisions exactly right, whether you're selling and buying or buying and then selling. So the committee, while was cognizant of what was going on, did not make any short-term changes in the asset allocation.
So, follow up, Madam Chair.
Follow up.
Yeah. So, a fancy way of telling me you guys watched. They were more spectators than active participants in what happened in the first quarter of 2020.
No, I wouldn't say they were spectators. They were cognizant of what was happening. They recognized that this was potentially a very short-term change, and have been rewarded for staying the course.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Goley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One question, and it's good to hear that we're in the top 74% of peers in investing. But if I look at the past report, I believe this 1% was a lot worse than our peers did. And what was that percentage? Could you refresh my mind as to what that memory of what that percentage was, where we stood with this 1%? Because I think that's part of the reason where we failed.
1.1% for the fiscal year ending June 30 put us in the bottom decile of peers. And that was primarily because for that 1 year period, the S&P 500 outperformed everything. The Barclays Ag outperformed everything on the fixed income side. The portfolio was well diversified and did not own just the S&P 500, nor did it just own the Barclays Ag. And as I mentioned, the performance through November 30th has rewarded that well-diversified portfolio. So the 1 year return in the bottom decile is an anomaly, primarily based upon the very strong performance of the S&P 500 and the Barclays Ag.
What was the follow-up? Thank you, Madam Chair. What were the returns of those that were in the upper percentage of this past year? If we were to look at comparing our 1.1% to what they were making, where were they on the scale?
They were in the low single digits. There was a very narrow range between the top and the bottom.
Thank you.
Representative Yakubovich?
Thank you. Can you give me the latest number on the unfunded liabilities side, please?
Yeah, our funded ratio is approximately 61%. Our unfunded liability is approximately $6 billion. There are slides later on that go into the detail of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'd like to say that after talking with people at the session, I checked one of my retirement accounts and I was down 3.5% June to June, but up over the course of 2020. So it was a difficult period, as you all noted.
Madam Chair, this is George Lagos. If I could just mention, I appreciate the nature of the questions we're hearing, but I think the thing I would emphasize is that this is largely in part what happens when you look at snapshots and not the movie. The track record over the past 10 years has been excellent. We're in the top 26%, not the top 74% over that period. And June 30 of 20 is 1 day. And because of the way this process works, that day, June 30 of every year, is when the picture is taken. So it's one frame in a movie, and what counts is the movie. So over that time period, the results have been excellent. And again, if you look at where we are in the first 5 months of the current fiscal year, we're double digits, 14%. And if you just look at that in comparison, and in addition to where we just ended the last fiscal year, you can see how things over time give you a much different impression than they do if you pick any particular day. So not to belabor it, but I think that's an important point to be made.
President Lekes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Please remind me, what is the number of years that the data is averaged over to determine the rates that the participating employers pay? I mean, what I'm wondering is, to what extent is this, 1 year's result going to have increased costs for, the municipalities and other employers.
As I mentioned on one of the earlier slides, that 1 year at 20 will be smoothed over 5 years. The next rate setting valuation will be June 30, 21. Obviously, I don't know what our performance will be for the fiscal year ending 21, but that will be in addition to the prior 4 years and smoothed over that period. Part of the reduction in the assumed rate of return that the board adopted last spring was due to the lower expectations across all the capital markets as we move forward.
Follow up, please.
Follow up.
So was there an increase set at the end of June and what the municipalities had to pay? I understand it would have been less than the full amount because it's averaged over 5 years, but was there an increase?
The employer rates that were certified by the board in September of 20 was based upon the actual valuation at June 30, 19. So the results of June 30, 20 and the results of June 30 to be 21 will be incorporated in the valuation as of 21 to set the rates in 22. So the rates set in September of 20 were based upon the fiscal year ending June 30, 19.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Goley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick question, I guess, probably for Larry. If I know our fiscal year goes July 1 to June 30, and we're getting our returns based on that time frame, is there a significant difference using that time frame versus using a January 1 to December 30th time frame in the market?
Over 1 year period, yes. The calendar year returns versus the fiscal year returns can be dramatically different. We don't have the 12/31 performance as of yet. We expect that sometime next week, but clearly the second half of 20 is dramatically better than the first half of 20, and I expect that to be substantially better than the fiscal year returns. But again, these are 1 year returns. To reiterate what George said is we are a long-term investor, and 1 year returns are important, but the longer term returns are much more important.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Follow up.
Yeah, I'm not talking just about this year. I'm talking about historically, year over year, using that time frame of January to December versus July to June.
I mean, they will be different, but over the long term, the averages will still be comparable.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's me. Good morning, everyone. I'm Gerard Murphy. I'm the Director of Finance here at NHRS, and I will be discussing the next 4 slides beginning on number 20 here. So here we go. If you recall the trust fund equation from a few slides earlier, there are 2 inputs on the left side of that equation. Now that Larry has covered the investment income, I'll talk a little bit about the other input, contributions. Contribution amounts are calculated as percentage rates of payroll for members covered by NHRS, what we refer to as covered payroll. And there are 2 types, as you've heard earlier, there are 2 types of contributions coming into NHRS. The first are member contributions, and they are set in state statute with the rates for the 4 different plans listed here on this slide. These rates tend not to change very often, as it has been over 10 years since those rates have last changed. The other contribution type is employer contributions. These contribution rates are calculated every 2 years in our odd year actuarial valuation reports, and then certified by the NHRS Board of Trustees. There are different rates for each of the 4 member groups, and each rate is made up of the 3 components: the normal cost, the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, and the medical subsidy. We'll talk a little more about these components in a bit, but the last thing I wanted to mention from this slide was that last bullet regarding the fact that political subdivisions have been paying the full employer contribution cost for all of their NHRS members since the state subsidy was repealed in 2011. For a number of years before that, the state had been paying a portion of the employer contributions for teachers, police, and fire members for all local employers. Next slide, please. Okay. All right, so the 3 components of the rates. Normal cost. Normal cost is just the basics, the estimated cost of pension benefits as they are earned in the absence of any other factors. The member contributions that we talked about on the last page cover most of the normal cost, with the employer rate, with a component of the employer rate making up the difference. The next component of the employer rate is the portion that goes to pay off the unfunded liability, the UAAL. This is the estimated value of benefits accrued in the past but not yet funded. It is determined by the actuaries and calculated by comparing the actuarial present value of projected benefits with the actuarial value of trust assets. And the difference is the UAAL. The UAAL gets a lot of attention, and it makes up a substantial portion of the contribution rates for NHRS employers, as you will see in a later slide. As of 6/30/20, the NHRS UAL balance was $6.04 billion, and this resulted in a funded ratio of 61%. There are a number of factors driving this current UAL balance. First up were the artificially low employer contributions caused by a flawed statutory funding methodology put in place in response to economic pressure back in the 90s. This flawed funding methodology was coupled with an extended period of transferring so-called excess earnings, returns above a certain threshold, out of the pension trust and into the special account. These conditions were then exacerbated by the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. And then the third main driver of the growth in the UAL has been the reductions in the assumed rate of return in 2011, 2016, and most recently in 2020. All of these reductions were enacted in response to recommendations from our actuaries after conducting actuarial experience studies. The last thing about the UAAL that I wanted to mention was the amortization schedule. A little over 10 years ago, the legislature enacted a closed 30-year period to pay off the UAAL. That period ended in will end in 2039. Then a few years ago, layered amortization was introduced. The closed period, that original closed period with 20 years remaining, was kept in place for the UAL balance as of 6/30/2017. And then the change in the UAL for every 2-year period after that will then be amortized over a period not to exceed 20 years. So there'll be a layer every 2 years to amortize changes to the UAL. And this layered amortization was put into place to eliminate some of the volatility that would have been present under the old set closed structure of that 30 years. So let's see, where am I? Okay. The last component of the employer rate. So we had the normal cost, the unfunded liability, and then the last component, it's the medical subsidy. And as you heard before, eligibility for this subsidy program is now closed. It's a dwindling population, and funding is determined on a pay-as-you-go basis. So it's really enough to keep the program running with margins put in place in case experience comes in higher. Okay. If we could move to the next slide, please. Okay. So here we have our two main work products of our actuarial consultant. We get a valuation report every year. However, the even year reports are scaled down versions, and they really only provide us with the information we need to complete our annual financial statements and be in compliance with GASB requirements. But the odd year valuation reports they're beefed up versions of the reports, and they contain all of the information necessary for the board to set rates. As we discussed before, the reports have calculations for present value of projected benefits, for the actuarial value of assets, deriving the UAAL and the funded ratio. The second report listed on this slide is the actuarial experience study, which is conducted every 4 years. These reports compare actual experience with the actuarial assumptions in place in order to determine if changes to those assumptions should be made. There are two types of actuarial assumptions, demographic and economic. The demographic assumptions include things like mortality rates, retirement rates, system withdrawal rates, disability rates, that sort of thing. Where the economic assumptions include the assumed rate of return, the wage inflation rate, and the price inflation rate. The most recent experience study covered the 4-year period, fiscal years 2016 to 2019, and it was presented to the board in the spring of 2020. The assumption changes recommended in that report were then used in the 6/30/19 actuarial evaluation report presented to the board in the summer of 2020. And this report was then used to certify rates for the 22-23 biennium in September of 2020. Next slide, please. So what did the board do? Based on the recommendations contained in the 16 to 19 experience study and input from NHRS staff, our independent investment consultant, and a number of economic experts, the board voted to change assumptions, both demographic and economic. On the demographic side, the biggest impact was the change to mortality rates. And this was driven mainly by the adoption of new public pension plan mortality tables. They're a relatively new creation specific to public pension plans. On the economic side, you can see those changes listed on the slide here. Wage growth and inflation rates were decreased. I wanted to point out, as you heard before, there's a lower wage growth for teachers, and that's due to the long-term decline in the population of teachers. So they're at a slightly lower rate than the other three employee groups. And then obviously, as you've all heard, the change with the biggest impact was the reduction to the assumed rate of return. So with that ends my portion of the presentation. Before I turn it back over to George, I'd be happy to try and answer any questions folks have.
Representative Goley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick question I have, because it dramatically increased the unfunded accrued liability, was reducing the assumed rate of return. You had the option, looking at the minutes, of going to 7% versus a 6.75%. And knowing what that was going to do to the unfunded accrued liability and also to the municipalities in the rate setting, why did you choose 6.75 when the 7% option was available?
Let's see. George, were you going to cover that topic in your portion next up?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. And I'm happy to just address it now, because we'll come to it anyway in a minute. First of all, our actuary told us that 7.25 wouldn't be considered as actuarially reasonable. So that was the starting point. So knowing that, we knew we had to make a change. The actuary said that a range from about 6.25 to 7 would be considered in the reasonable range. but also recommended, made it clear that his recommendation would have been 6.75, and that he would have, frankly, would have preferred a number lower than that, but he was willing to take 6.75 as being reasonable, and that would be his recommendation. So he did acknowledge he would accept 7, but what we thought that would do would, I shouldn't say we, because first of all, staff doesn't vote on this. This is a board decision. But our recommendation from the staff standpoint was 6.75 as well. So that being said, I would mention also the investment committee actually came up with 6.5 as the number. So there are a number of different ways you can look at it. And our point of view was that the message we were clearly getting from the actuary was that if we picked a number higher than 6.75, we would likely be revisiting it in 2-year time period. And we don't like to be jumping around, reviewing the assumed rate of return on a 2-year time period. We prefer to do it every 4 or 5 years in line with the experience study. So, the objective of the board is to properly price the plan, to adopt those assumptions that we think most closely reflect what the actual experience has been and what it's likely to be in the future with the advice from a number of sources. So that's how the vote came out.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Follow up.
And George, I mean, we all know that it also has the impact on the rates that municipalities pay. And I understand you don't want to revisit it every 2 years, but the hit the cities and towns were taking with that change, I mean, wouldn't it have been reasonable to revisit it in 2 years and set it at 7%?
Well, I think, it was within the board's discretion to make that decision, but I think the reason, personally, I think the decision was a good one, was that their job is to properly set the assumptions based on the information provided. And to the extent that you don't make those adjustments, every time you make an adjustment in a way that causes you to come back and adjust it again, just continues to add to the unfunded liability, because what that does is you end up underfunding if you're not funding in accordance with what reality ends up being. So it creates a greater probability that you're adding to the unfunded liability more than you would be by adjusting it now. You're actually strengthening the plan by bringing in more dollars. Is the impact substantial? Yes, it is, but it's also realistic in terms of what the plan experience has been and what all of our economic experts are telling us we should be expecting. And I can tell you, Representative Goli, that issue itself wasn't lost at all on the board. That was part of the discussion, was fully contemplated, and that was the decision of the board, taking all factors into consideration.
Representative O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is referring to slide number 20. When you look at the Group 1 employees, both groups are at their contribution rates in the same percentile, but there seems to be a disparity on the Group 2 employees. What is the difference between the police and fire, and why are those two numbers different? And who actually stays longer out of the Group 2? Is it the fire stay longer or the police stay longer in terms of employment?
I can address that, folks. This is Marty. Prior to 2011, the Group 2 rates were the same. They were both 9.3% of pay for police and fire. House Bill 2 did create a larger rate, member contribution rate for fire. I was pretty much living in the basement that legislative session, and I attended all the hearings. I don't recall a stated rationale for why the difference between police and fire, other than the fact that at that time, 10 years ago, the fire plan as a component of the overall plan was more poorly funded than the police plan. But there wasn't a lot of discussion about why those numbers are disparate. And in answer to your second question, firefighters are among the longer, they tend to average out working longer than police. I could get the averages for you. I just police and fire retirees retiring in 2019, the average service for a firefighter was 26 years, and the average service for a police officer was 23. So they do tend to work longer historically.
Follow up, if I may, Madam Chair.
Follow up.
So from what you told me, my interpretation to tell my friends, basically the firefighters are penalized within this system by paying more in the contribution rate, even though they're staying longer and making more heftier contributions to the retirement system than the other group.
I would say it was a legislative decision, and NHRS wouldn't say, whether it was fair or unfair, but that was what the majority of the legislature chose to enact back in 2011.
Representative Lekas.
Thank you.
So I don't fully understand, that's a understatement, the layered approach to dealing with the unfunded liability. And I'm not looking for a detailed presentation at this point, but I have a general question on that, is that on the effect of it, and that is, assuming that we don't change the rules and assuming the given assumptions play out, when would we expect to be at 100% funded?
I'll take that. This is George. The reality is there's now two different aspects to the amortization of unfunded liability. The original unfunded liability that was sort of fixed at 2017 we're now about 11 years into that. So at 2039, that original part of the unfunded liability should be at zero. Okay.
What was that? I missed the date.
2039.
Thank you.
Right. So, but at 2039, there'll be a series of layered amortization schedules that will depend on the gains and losses that occur between now and then. And that number is an unknown right now. So there could very well be an unfunded liability in 2039, depending upon the experience of the plan, starting with the last evaluation through the 2039 date. But there's no way at this point in time of telling you what that number might be.
All right.
This is Marty.
Sorry, follow up.
Go on, Marty.
Well, I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention as well, it's sort of a quick Cliff Notes version of thinking at it, is when the amortization was put in legislation in 2007, beginning in 2010, the intent was to be 100% funded by 2039. The layering was put in as a recommendation of the Decennial Commission back in 2017, because as you get closer to 2039, you'd be much more subject to market fluctuations, and you could have tremendous swings in employer contributions. So the layering is sort of a safety valve. We won't be 100% funded in 2039, but there's sort of a manageable 20-year tranches to pay off, or recognize future gains and losses. So we wouldn't ever theoretically get to where we are now. We'd be pretty close to 100%, but those other layers would be paid off, going forward. So the intergenerational equity for taxpayers in different periods would be more balanced than it is now.
Okay, thank you.
The other issue with respect to the layered amortization is there was no provision in the statute as to how to amortize any gains and losses beyond 2039. So what would have happened is every 2 years, if there was a gain, the rate would go down and you'd have to amortize that immediately. If there was a loss, the rate would go up and you'd have to amortize that immediately. So this 20-year layered amortization allows this to go on beyond 2039.
Representative Pearson had a question.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I know we're not changing slides here. That would be a little helpful if it matches what the topic is. But you mentioned for those especially that are new, you mentioned the formation of the retirement system in 1967. The agreement that was made in 1967 looks a whole lot different than the makeup of the system today. And I was wondering if you could just touch on the state's responsibility in 1967 when they created the NHRS versus what the state is doing as far as their responsibility in 2021.
Marty, I trust that question goes to the subsidy of municipal local governmental rates. So why don't you tackle that?
Yeah, I'm a bit of the class historian at NHRS. So when RSA 100A was enacted back in '67, I've got an original law book. The whole statute was about 38 pages long, and same margins now. The law book's about 160 pages. So there have been changes throughout the history of NHRS. In terms of the state's obligation, in '67, the state was paying 40% of the cost for teachers. That was actually a remnant from the previous legacy plan for teachers only. The teachers' retirement system, they've been paying that at least since the early 50s, as far back as I can tell. Back in 1977, the legislature changed the subsidy, so they were paying 35% for teachers, police, and fire. And that was in effect until 2009, 10, 11, when the subsidy was ratcheted down to 30% one year, 25% the next year, and then eliminated.
Representative Schuett?
Well, I had a follow-up. Sorry, I couldn't get to my unmic.
Sorry,
If
please
that's
go
okay,
ahead.
I apologize. So just so I understand what you're saying, Marty, the makeup today is substantially different than when the retirement system was formed, where the state has basically just abandoned its agreed upon responsibility. If I'm following your math and calendars correctly here, did that have an effect on the unfunded liability, or was that entirely downshifted to the local level, if you will? I know there's some state agencies involved, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, it didn't change the liability. It just shifted the cost, from the amount that the state was paying on behalf of the municipalities. That cost moved over. So if you think about it, the other way, for a number of years, for teachers, police, and fire, localities and school districts were paying 65% of what the total rate was, and then they ended up paying 100%. So that elimination of the 35% subsidy was about a 50% increase in what their dollar amounts they were paying to the retirement system, even though the liability remained the same. And this change was challenged by some municipalities and upheld by the Supreme Court. I think that decision came out in maybe 10 or 11.
Representative Schuett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a fairly simple question for Mr. Murphy. You mentioned that the mortality rates had changed. Did those rates increase or decrease?
Thanks, Representative Schuett. Basically, the mortality experience has improved. Folks, as we all have heard from countless sources, folks are living longer as time goes on. So that it was a cost. There was a cost associated with the changes to the mortality assumptions. You are correct.
Thank you.
Representative Broda?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Carlin, could you kindly give those dates again? So in 67, 40% was for the teachers, 40% of the cost plan was for teachers, and then in 77 we reduced to 35%, but it included police and fire, and then it went to 25% when, in 2011, did you say?
I believe the legislation was passed in 09. So fiscal 10, it was 30%. Fiscal 11, it was a 25% subsidy. And the original law that was enacted in 09 was restoring it to 35% for fiscal 12, but the legislature in 2011 eliminated the subsidy instead. I've got sort of a white paper on this on the NHRS website, and I'll send it over to Pam to distribute to the committee if anyone's interested.
Thank you. I think there will be a lot of people interested. Representative O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think if I'm correct, past legislators came up with people who did do some shift coverage or overtime work, such as details and such. And in the past, that money, when they got their pay for that, in the group two, particularly what we're talking about, went into their retirement benefit. But then I think that was kind of cut back. And if it was cut back, if somebody worked that overtime shift and yet the pension system did take a percentage, the normal percentage out of that shift, did that increase the unfunded liability? When somebody's working 25 to 30 years, that's a substantial chunk of change that was lost by the retirement system.
Yes, but the benefits were changed also.
It probably had an actuarial impact, but it's sort of on the margins. I don't think the actuary looked at that particular aspect significantly, but for the record, any police and fire members hired after July 1st of 11, the detail pay doesn't count towards their pension calculation anymore, and neither the member nor their employer pay contributions to NHRS on that money. So it's considered non-pensionable compensation.
I don't see any more questions right now, so let's go on.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're on slide 24. Some of these issues were things we just talked about, but why did the board take the action they did? Well, the actuarial experience over the past 4 years showed that the assumptions didn't support the rates that were in place. The economic and investment forecast that the board received showed that inflation was going to be very limited. So therefore, the interest rate had to be taken into consideration, and also investment returns were universally seen by, I think there were a total of 17 or 19 different investment operations that were taken into consideration by our actuaries, and then others by the investment committee as well. But clearly all expectations for future returns were muted. So on that basis, a couple of the key assumptions were taken down and reduced. And I think you all know the Fed has indicated that zero interest is their target for the foreseeable future. And I think we just saw that the most recent year was around 1.4%. And we're at 2 now. So, we're seeing what we're expecting to see in that regard. That's what happened in terms of the analysis. And then in terms of the why, well, the trustees are fiduciaries and they're subject to the constitutional legal requirements of the New Hampshire Constitution in 100A to determine contribution rates by sound actuarial evaluation and practice, and to act solely in the interest of the plan participants and the beneficiaries. So the trustees, in fact, were making the decisions that they're legally required to make. Slide. So the primary drivers, I think we've covered this, but the assumed rate of return is almost always the biggest impact in terms of contribution rates, and that was reduced by 0.5% from 7.25 to 6.75. We adopted updated post-retirement mortality assumptions, as we just discussed. People are living longer, but that increases the cost of the plan because obviously benefits have to be paid out for longer periods of time than anticipated. And the payroll growth factor also has been one that we've been trying to catch up to. Employment growth just hasn't been growing at the rate as expected. Compensation hasn't been growing as the rate has been expected. And that's been a particular problem with teachers because, as you all know, the number of pupils in the state has been diminishing over time. And although it's not a one-to-one relationship, that means the number of teachers has been decreasing as well. Additional influences on the rates, although these are far more modest, the COLA that was passed, in which we're now paying out, had a marginal impact because it was agreed that it would be funded by future contributions. And then also layered amortization has a minor impact, and that's sort of a mitigating impact, but because we're only in the first layer here, that impact was somewhat nominal. That will increase over time in terms of muting the impact of any particular economic cycle on contribution rates. So this slide, I think, gives you the graphic of where we are with regard to contribution rates. And just to keep it simple, we've got all the member categories on the left, but if we just take state employees, which is the top line going across, you can see the pension normal cost, 2.58%. That's the actual cost of the benefit itself. In terms of what state employees will receive for a benefit, what would that cost? 2.58% of the employer contribution rate is what's there. Then next to it, you can see the unfunded liability. The unfunded liability is 11.17% of the total employer rate. So it's about, in the shaded column, you can see with that category, it's 81% of what's being paid by employers is going to pay for that unfunded liability, that debt. Medical subsidy is about 0.75%. And when you add it up, the total employer rate right now is 14.53. So again, you can see that the actual cost of the benefit is nominal as compared to the overall cost to employers. And that's why it's so important to stay on the path of extinguishing this unfunded liability over time and to making the actuarial adjustments that are required to fund the plan properly as we go along. Slide. This slide is just intended to give some perspective or context for where New Hampshire stands relative to the rest of the country. So you can see our data goes across the top line. This is a report published by Fitch. And for the purpose of doing this, they equalize all the investment plans by assuming that their rate of return is 6%. So in other words, they adjust everybody's rate of return down to 6%. So it's apples to apples, to use my accounting jargon. You can see that as a percent of personal income, New Hampshire's adjusted net pension liability is 1.5%, which ranks us 10th in the country. So that's a very favorable place to be, and that's lowest to highest. So that's obviously compared to, you can see we've identified the New England states with us and then the national average. So we're well below the national average, and you can see how we compare to states like Connecticut, Massachusetts, where the number is dramatically higher. Then when you look at pension contributions as a percent of direct general spending by state and local governments, we're at 3.91%, and that basically puts us in the middle of the pack. So again, this is just offered by way of context in terms of taking a look at the bigger picture. This graph, I think, is the next two graphs I'm going to talk about for a minute because I think they're very, very important. This is the assumed rate of return discussion we had. You know, our assumed rate of return is now 6.75%. But if you go back to where we were in 2001, you can see we're at 9. The blue bar that's below us, that our rate of return is the line going across the page. The bars going north and south, so to speak, represent what the average is as published by the National Association of Retirement System Administrators, which is NASRA. You'll probably come to hear that term a lot. So you can see that we were being much more optimistic than the national average back then by almost a full point. Then over time, what we've done is we've adjusted our assumed rate of return, and we've come down first to 8.5, then to 7.75, then 7.25, and 6.75. So now we're actually less than the national average in terms of our assumed rate of return. The last time we adjusted, when we came down to 7.25, you can see in 2015, we dropped down. That 7.25 put us at below what the average was. But you can see the average caught back up to us in 18. And now in 19, because we've adjusted again, we've dropped below. So what that means is the board over that period of time has taken the steps to be conservative in its views on the assumed rate of return, and it's frankly been right. The trend has been coming down over time, and the board is making the adjustments on a timely basis, which is what the board, I think, is charged to do under the law and by fiduciary duty. So they've done a very good job there. Next slide. So this slide, I think, really tells a very positive story about what's happened over the past 10 years in terms of funding the plan. The top line is what our peers have done. So if you go back to 2010, the average funded ratio for our peers was 77.1. So there's no doubt we've had a funding problem going back to the date when we recognized what our true unfunded liability was, following the recognition that the actuarial methodology was inappropriate. But over that time period, you can see that we've had a very gradual but positive increase in our assumed rate of return, even though we've taken steps, in our funded ratio, even though we've taken steps to reduce our assumed rate of return. And as you all know, when we make reductions in our assumed rate of return, our funded ratio comes down because our unfunded liability goes up. If you look at our peer group, over that period of time, their funded ratio has come down from 77.1 to 72.4. So it's been an improvement, a relatively modest one, while ours has gone up over that time period. So what that means is, compared to our peers, we've taken more positive steps to improve our funded level. And so what was once a gap of about 19% has come down dramatically, so it's closer to about 9%. The other thing I want to mention as well is that our current rate, it's at 60.8, it's about 11.4. The other thing I want to mention, though, is had we not adjusted our assumed rate of return this last time around and left it where it was at 7.25, 7.25 is about the average right now for all those other plans that are above us on that line. Our funding ratio would have been 64.1, which would have made us even closer to the average than we've ever been before. So we have, in fact, been strengthening the plan over that period of time, which I think is a very positive message. And it shows that the plan that we have in place is, in fact, working, and that the board, I think, is meeting its responsibilities. One other footnote to this slide, it's not directly related to the slide, but the rating agencies take a look at all public pension plans, and they comment on ours as well. And in New Hampshire has very strong financial position, I think, and I think the rating agencies appreciate that. But one of the things they always express some concern about, some more than others, is the funded ratio of the plan. And S&P in their most recent report said that even though they expressed concern with our funding level, the quote from them was, "We believe the state's funding discipline, including a commitment to funding at the full annual pension contribution level that exceeds static funding levels, is likely to improve pension funding trajectory over time." So, this is something the rating agencies look at, and I think the actions of the board over this period of time have been positive in that respect. Slide. So the key takeaways, the board has got legal and constitutional requirements with regard to the funding of the plan and determining rates. The decisions were made at the last experience study were necessary to properly fund the plan over the long term. The fact that employer contribution rates strengthen the plan, that means that it positions the plan better to withstand economic downturns. And it also promotes intergenerational equity, which in plain English means that by not kicking the can down the road, so to speak, the people who are paying for the benefits now and paying as employers and members are paying in line with the benefit payout, as opposed to pushing the debt further down for other people in the future to pay off. One very important point I want to mention is, these changes don't really change the cost of the plan, only the timing of the payments. The only way they actually change the cost of the plan is if the changes aren't made on a timely basis. That does, in effect, increase the unfunded liability over and above what it would otherwise be. So it really is very much, I won't call it a game, but it very much is a case of pay me now or pay me later. And, you know, one thing that we've seen historically is that pay me later is a very bad place to be. So I think that's a very important message for the committee. I'm going to be handing it back over to Marty here. And before I do, I'm happy to take any questions.
I don't see any specific questions. So, Marty, you can finish up.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. We are close to the end. I'm sure folks are getting a little bit hungry. Couple of slides on legislation, just sort of wrap up what's been going on. Last year, there were 13 bills related to the retirement system introduced, all of which I think all the House bills went through ED&A. Nothing was enacted last year, which is a fairly rare occurrence. A couple of bills did pass through the House and died in the Senate omnibus bills that the governor vetoed last fall because of COVID. This year so far, we've seen 9 LSRs posted related to the retirement system, 7 in the House and 2 in the Senate. Many of the House LSRs have 1 or more sponsors on this committee. Some couple of them are repeat bills from last year or from prior sessions. So you've got a good base of knowledge on that. Everything I've seen except 1 is going to ED&A this year. One other bill that the committee saw in 18 was assigned to education this year. And I'll follow that over there. Since 2007, and again, I was talking about that as sort of the beginning of the beginning in terms of getting NHRS shored up moving forward. There's been over 100 changes to the plan through legislation since then. Some significant, like the contribution rates, the state subsidy, things like that, and others that are fairly minor or administrative or affect a small pool of people. But cumulatively, you've kept us busy, I guess, is the takeaway there. And just to clarify for the newer members, you know, our role at NHRS staff is to provide you with data and objective analysis, either internal or prepared by our actuary. We do that by submitting fiscal note worksheets to LBA for them to put with the bills. We do something called bill briefs, which are handouts on more complicated bills or bills that have a history. So you've got some information at your fingertips. We testify on most bills, not in support or against, but just for informational purposes. And then the informational materials that we can provide as needed, annual reports, et cetera. So we really try to be, you know, Switzerland in a sense. We don't want to take a position on matters that are left to the legislature completely. They're basically planted settler functions. You know, you folks decide when people can retire and how much they're going to pay and how long they have to work and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to give you the numbers so you can make a reasoned decision based on facts and not sort of put our thumb on the scale. The only time NHRS does take a position on legislation is when the board feels that legislation may intrude on their fiduciary duties or may be constitutional or internal revenue code problematic with those documents. So again, we are kind of heading to the end. We'll go one last slide for George to bring it all home. But if anybody has any questions about legislative matters, I'm glad to take them now.
Don't see any.
Thank you, Marty. So I'll just wrap up quickly, and then I'll just give you a very quick update on where we are on the executive director search. So our concluding message is that I think, as you've seen, the retirement system provides a relatively modest pension benefit. And those benefits that get paid, 80% of them do remain in state in terms of the local economy. There is a plan in place to pay down the unfunded liability and to manage future viability. I think it's a good plan. It's worked well, and the charts I provided that we looked at, I think, show that we are in fact on the path. And now that we're 10 years into that amortization schedule, because there's a crossover point, we should be seeing more and more progress in terms of improving the funded ratio as compared to what's happened over the past 10 years. The board has been acting in a fiduciary manner and taking the proper steps to assure proper plan funding, and that's reflected in the decisions they've made with regard to the assumed rate of return over the 10 years, and as indicated, the improvement in the funded ratio relative to our peers, despite the impact of those reductions on the funded ratio. And finally, my comment earlier, those of you who have been around for the last 9 years have heard me say on more than one occasion that it is a movie and it's not a slide or one frame. You can say it's a marathon and not a sprint. There aren't any shortcuts, and we always have to be careful about snapshots because they present a very narrow slice of what the bigger picture is. And what's important is how we do over time. And I think the last 10 years have shown that we're making good progress. And although I'm not going to be here to see it, I am retiring at the end of February. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to stay on the plan for the next 20 years and achieve that objective. So the last thing I want to say is I have been with the system for 9 years. It's been an honor and privilege to work with the folks at the retirement system and to serve the state in that regard. I'm proud of the progress we've made. It's been certainly been a very interesting and challenging experience over that period of time. We're pretty deep into the search now for a replacement. In fact, we have a meeting this afternoon with the Personnel Committee for a couple of hours to review a short list of candidates that we have from all across the country. So we're making good progress, and we expect to be able to come to a decision in the very near term. So I thank you for all your service, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I have a question.
Yes, Representative Sytek.
What are you going to do in retirement?
What am I going to do? TBD. I tried to retire once about 12 years ago and I failed. So I'm just going to see if I can do better at it this time. The jury is out, though.
Thanks.
Okay, Representative Lakis.
Yes, thank you for the presentations. If one of us has any questions, clarifications on this, who would it be best to contact and what's the contact info?
Why don't you come directly into Marty, and Marty can tell you the best way to do that.
And my contact information is on the email that Pam will be forwarding to you with links to some of the informational documents.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and that should be in your email box right now. I sent it over.
Representative Schuett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to wish George good luck with your attempted retirement this time, and we'll see you later in the session, Marty.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all for being here.
Yes. How clearly can you hear me now? Am I still
excellent?
distorted?
Much better.
I don't know what changed, because I'll try again tomorrow, or later this afternoon, I guess. Thank you.
All right, we are breaking for lunch. We will resume at 1 o'clock with a short talk on the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification. Please close your cameras, and Pam will be sharing her screen with a notice that says that. All right, thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you all.
See you, George.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Madam Chair, question. Carol.
Yes.
Are we supposed to be leaving this link open for the 1 o'clock return? Just is that what I'm getting from that? We just leave it?
You can leave it open, or you can relink, whichever is more convenient for you.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Thank you.
Hello.
Wow, everybody is so prompt.
I will admit I'm still eating my lunch, so I'm gonna block myself. I like that we can still participate and take care of ourselves in the appropriate ways.
Okay, it's 1 o'clock. Nice view, Steve. Welcome back to our orientation. This afternoon, we're going to hear a bit from the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification, which we have a lot of dealings with, and the director, Lindsay Courtney, is
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss a little bit about what our office does and what we've been working on over the last year or so. I do have a PowerPoint, if I can share my screen.
And if you would please send us a copy of this presentation, we'd very much appreciate it.
Of course, happy to do that. Is can you see those slides? Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. Alrighty, so just by way of background, OPLC is a very fairly new agency to the state of New Hampshire. It was formed in 2015 under Governor Hassan. Prior to its creation, we had the majority of the technical licensing boards had been previously consolidated with the joint boards, as you may recall. Several of our health licensing boards were administratively attached to the Department of Health and Human Services, and then several boards operated independently. So with HB2, the licensing boards, the majority of the licensing boards were consolidated into the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification. With that, obviously, our positions and systems and funding transferred from other state boards and agencies to the office. The purpose is really set forth in RSA 310A, which is to promote efficiency and economy in the administration of the professional licensing boards. I think what's important to note is that the purpose of the agency is not necessarily the purpose of the licensing boards. The licensing boards all retain their own individual regulatory authority over the professions that they regulate and license. The office's goal is really to just promote the efficiency in the process. So a couple of highlights I wanted to make note of. We currently have 54 licensing boards that we administer, as well as the prescription drug monitoring program. At present, we have a little over 300 board members. The majority of them receive some sort of per diem, although it's not consistent, something that we're trying to remedy through statutory change. And some of them also receive mileage reimbursement. Beyond that, they're essentially volunteers, most of whom are appointed by GNC. Some are appointed directly by me, and some others are nominated by various professional associations. So with the exception of the PDMP, which is its own little silo, as I'm sure you know, our staff at the office primarily assist the boards with two functions. The first obviously is licensing individuals who wish to practice a particular profession in New Hampshire. And the second is really enforcing compliance through laws and investigations. So we've got licensing and we've got enforcement. A couple of fun facts. In fiscal year 20, we had over 223,000 occupational licenses in New Hampshire that were active. This was a substantial increase from the prior fiscal year of about 29%. It's really unclear at this point what caused such an increase in the number of licensees. The Board of Nursing bears the bulk of our licensees. It could be that we're seeing an increase of licensees through the Board of Nursing. In fiscal year 20, we cataloged about 1,100 complaints. I'm not actually confident that that number is accurate, and as we talk a little bit further about our reorganization, I'll explain why. But essentially, we have since consolidated the investigations and complaint process and realized that we were not counting all of the complaints, and not all the boards were keeping track of the complaints as required. So we really think that the number that we're going to see in fiscal year 21 is closer to about 3,000 inspections and investigations. So in fiscal year 20, we had 67 permanent classified positions. We had reorganized, we're working on reorganizing the agency. So about 17 full-time positions are dedicated to enforcement related tasks, inspections and investigations, prosecutors. 39 full-time positions are dedicated to licensing and administering boards. And about 20% of OPLC's workforce is part-time. I can tell you from my observation that in and of itself is a barrier to achieving efficiency and economy, and that there has been a constant churn of personnel at OPLC related to its part-time workforce. People generally utilize the part-time positions to move into other full-time positions throughout the state. We have seen a decrease in that, obviously, because of the hiring freeze. So we've had some consistency there, but that is something that we're seeking to hopefully resolve as we move forward. We are a self-funded agency, and obviously our fees have to bear a relationship and approximate the expense of issuing the license, of inspecting and regulating the businesses licensed. We've had some different approaches with our fees. I think initially we were general funded, although that predates me. And then we moved to a dedicated fund that was non-lapsing. And then now we have a dedicated fund that lapses at the end of every fiscal year, which from my perspective, can be problematic in trying to meet the needs of the agency. Because we administer over 54 licensing boards, each with their own professional regulatory authority, we obviously engage in a lot of rulemaking. And in 2018, we comprised 20% of the state's rulemaking proposals, which is quite significant in an agency of our size, relatively small, about 86 staffers, to accomplish 20% of the state's rulemaking proposals. So we really are right now engaged in a process to really rethink the purpose of the agency, the mission of the agency, and the vision of the agency. I think many of you can recall when OPLC was formed. It's been quite a rocky start since 2015. And the agency itself really never came into its own. It really, in my opinion, took on a lot of the board's mission, which I think is distinct from the agency mission. So we're currently undergoing a review of our mission and our visions. But I think at a minimum, occupational licensing has to protect the public, obviously, by ensuring that individuals meet minimum standards necessary to practice in a safe manner. At the same time, we need to make sure that those standards, those regulations are not so out of touch that they represent an unnecessary barrier to workforce entry. So licensing in and of itself, it has to be a barrier to workforce entry, but we don't want to create unnecessary barriers. And I think that's one purpose of the agency that's distinct from licensing boards. So let's, I didn't create this, but I like it. It's a nice visual of how we all come together. So when OPLC was first created, this was the basic org chart in that in RSA 310A, we have two divisions. We have a division of health professions, a division of technical professions. We technically don't have a division of administration, but administration is overseen by the OPLC executive director. And when OPLC was, first formed, so we had 20 boards within the division of technical professions. You'll see them noted here. And the staff really mirrored what it looked like with the joint boards. And this existed, you'll see, until July of 2020. There really had been no major changes to the staff that were supporting the licensing boards. The division of health professions boards, obviously mainly health professions. We've added a few throughout the years, most recently veterinary medicine. And you'll see that the staff, again, through July 2020, really just mirrored what the boards had for existing staff when they came over to OPLC in 2015. So if I kind of scroll in, this was pharmacy, then we had nursing, cosmetology. There really had been no integration that one would expect for agency and what our purpose is. So really this past year, we've engaged in an initiative to achieve our statutory mission through achieve our statutory mission of achieving efficiencies through agency reorganization. So you can see in FY 2021, we had the Division of Health Professions and Division of Technical Professions. And each board and the staff that supported those boards had their own process for doing pretty much everything that our agency was accomplishing. So we had, between all of the boards, 54 different ways of taking in mail, 54 different ways of approaching customer service, 54 different licensing processes, and 54 different investigation processes. This obviously is not efficient and was not the intended purpose of the agency. And so what we have been doing over the last 6 to 8 months is going through an agency restructuring, and we are requesting some statutory changes to make this complete, to really align agency in accordance with job function and not subject matter. From my perspective, our staff accomplished two primary functions, licensing and enforcement, and so we should really be focusing on processes and not subject matter. So we'd like to create the Division of Licensing and Board Administration and the Division of Enforcement, and really get down to one mail process that's already been accomplished, one customer service approach, that's part of our next phase, one licensing process, and one investigation process. Where we're at with that right now is that we have created a Division of Enforcement, or without the actual statutory change of a division, but we've put the people together and they are functioning as one unit. We have put together one specific mail process, and we're moving on next to a customer service unit. So I spoke a little bit, obviously, about our agency reorganization project, but I think the other thing is we need to leverage technology in order to achieve efficiencies. So we've embarked on an online licensing initiative. Many of our boards have some version of online licensing through our My Licensing online portal. Not all are online, and not all require online renewals in particular. And this really is inefficient and increases the amount of time that it takes to get somebody licensed, which then results in a barrier to workforce entry. Because at the end of the day, what I'm seeing across the state is that we are really competing with other states, particularly Vermont. Really, Vermont, they're very fast in processing licenses. So if somebody comes in and they're looking for, they may be on the border and they're looking for a job, if it takes New Hampshire, 6 weeks to accomplish what it takes Vermont 24 hours to do, then obviously we're not going to obtain that licensed professional. to provide workforce for us. So in any event, we need to move, from my perspective, to electronic licensing. And so we've started on an initiative. All of our renewals will be up online by March 15th. And then we will slowly work toward getting all initial licensing applications online. We also need to improve communications. And our website has historically not been great at all. It's been very difficult, I think, for the end user to really understand basically what it takes to obtain a license and also to file a complaint. So we completely redesigned our website, and I just prior to this meeting saw a draft, and it should be launched by February 1st of 2021. It's a complete redesign focusing on improved communication to licensees. And then also document management, scanning all documentation to reduce error rates and making sure that we're leveraging technology that way. We are also working on achieving efficiency in accounting. We are moving to eliminate our double accounting method, which you may see when it comes up during the budget bill. But essentially, this was not transparent, in my opinion. It required some explanation as to what was actually going on with their finances. And so to increase public transparency, we want to eliminate the double accounting method. The other thing that we're looking at is, when OPLC was first formed, we were tracking everything down. We had different activity codes for all the boards. That's incredibly inefficient. So we needed to start functioning as an agency as opposed to 54 different boards. And so we're looking at possibly eliminating the activity codes. Obviously, we'd still be able to track expenses and revenue to the board level, but just the actual process of having everything broken up by activity codes, I think, will assist. And then finally, we're looking at achieving efficiency in personnel. One of the things we're looking at, as I said earlier, 20% of our workforce is part-time. This is a problem. This is a barrier to achieving efficiency. And so as we move forward, we'd really like to utilize some funding that has been historically a Class 50 funding to create full-time positions. And hopefully that'll provide us the consistency we need in workforce. Spoke a little bit about leveraging technology. Some of the projects that we're looking into include investigations and inspection software. When I first came on board about a year ago, we had one person functioning in a prosecutor role outside of the APU, and he is an attorney, but he wasn't in an attorney position. So we've completely created an in-house prosecutions unit and investigations unit that's really going to decrease the amount of time to get a case processed through our agency. When I came on board, cases were lagging for years, which is really unacceptable. So I've given my staff the directive that we need to reduce that to complaint to adjudication in 8 months or less. And I think it's going to help by leveraging technology. So we'd like to focus on moving to electronic operations that way. The other thing that we're working on is obviously our fees. So there's been some back and forth, I think, regarding fees in terms of what our statutory authority is and what the board's statutory authority is. So historically, as you may recall, all the boards set their fees. A number of our boards have fees set in statute. The majority of other fees are set in rule. Then in 2018, RSA 310A was amended to give OPLC the authority to set the fees. But the board still retained those fees or that authority in their practice acts. So our position in consulting with DOJ is that we did not necessarily have the authority to set fees for all the boards. And so we are seeking some statutory changes on that. And I'm assuming that at some point will come before you. But essentially, we're projecting revenue FY22 and 23. You'll see it reflected there. We are anticipated to lapse a certain amount of funding, of course, every year. And you'll see with our you'll see, you'll see the confusion because the agency was previously self-billing itself. So the numbers appear to be a little inflated in terms of our revenue for FY 2020, 15.1, and then obviously what we're anticipating for FY 22 and 23. So by eliminating the double accounting, it makes clear that what our revenue and expenses actually are. And so then in terms of priorities, we are, first thing is, we're undergoing a performance audit that I actually had the entrance meeting today. We are completing our move projects. Some of you may know, but that we were asked to move from our Philbrook building location. We did that quite expeditiously in about 30 days over July during COVID and during our restructuring. So it was a little difficult. It was fun, but we're now relocated at 7 Eagle Square, and so we have a couple of projects that we need to complete in order to make that happen. We're working on creating and implementing standardized procedures. So as I previously mentioned, the agency really hadn't done much by way of standardizing procedures. So the agency really is starting to exercise its authority to do that. Adjusting licensing fees have to be adjusted. Some of the boards are at 250%, some are at 9%, so we really need to adjust those fees, but I think we certainly need a statutory change in order to do that. We'd like to redefine our mission and vision. Again, I don't think it's just protecting the public. Protecting the public is obviously the board's mission, and we have to administer and facilitate that, but we need to do that in an efficient and economic way, which has impact on workforce. Again, we'd like to move all licensing online, eliminating paper, completing our agency restructuring. I'm hoping that to be completed within the next 6 months. I had a meeting with DOP today about that, and we're hoping to complete that over the next 6 months. And then finally, the agency is really interested in looking at all the requirements for licensure and eliminating those requirements that are not absolutely necessary to ensure minimum standards are satisfied. We're doing this with the boards, of course, but one of the prime examples that I'll give you is a photograph. I don't know why we require a photograph. Seems like there's some room for bias there. And that's just a prime example, but there are others for sure. And so as we get deeper into our licensing projects, we are going to be taking a look at that. Finally, what I didn't mention was our prescription drug monitoring program. This obviously, as you know, is a separate program that is a tool for providers and dispensers to utilize to determine when they're dispensing or prescribing controlled medications to assess whether or not that prescription is appropriate. There has been a lot of conversation at the state level, as you probably know, about what the overall purpose of the PDMP is. It was originally, I think, intended to be a provider tool. But as we've moved forward, I think there's a desire, obviously, to access the data for public health purposes. And so there's a conversation taking place regarding what PDMP's role, if any, is in public health. I think the state probably needs to make a decision on that. I think if PDMP is viewed as a public health tool, PDP probably does not belong at OPLC, to speak frankly. I mean, we deal with licensing. If it is a provider tool, then it is appropriately housed at OPLC. So I think some conversations need to be had regarding the purpose of the PDMP. And that's it. I apologize. I kind of went through that quickly and threw a lot of information at you, but I'm happy to answer any questions about what our agency does, what we're working on, what our goals are. If there's anything else I can provide, please don't hesitate.
And I'll just interject quickly that I sent Lindsay's presentation to all of you at about 11 o'clock this morning, along with the retirement systems presentation and the subcommittee list. So I used the House eDNA addresses, and if you should have that in your mailboxes.
Are there any questions? All got hit by the fire hose. It's me. All right. Representative.
Your audio cut out on me.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. My question goes in looking at the restructuring of the office. Being around for a little while and watching as this legislation was passed and going forward, it was my understanding we were just going to combine some of the functions and reduce duplication for numerous boards. This now seems like it's a whole total revamp of the boards under the executive director of OPLC. And case in point is looking at investigations or if there's any complaints going forward with any of the boards, that is going to go to a centralized hearing process versus going to each individual board. Could you just let me know if I'm correct on that going forward? And if so, what is the reaction from these boards and not being able to do the hearings themselves as individual boards with their members?
Yeah, no, thank you, Representative. I appreciate the question. So to get into the nitty gritty of what we're doing with complaints is that we actually worked with all boards to have them issue standing orders. So they've all consented to this process, those that are participating. What we were finding is that all of the complaints were originally going to board administrators, and there was not a specific standard as to what they were supposed to be doing with those complaints. Some sent letters to licensees, some gave them to the boards, some put them in a file drawer, to be frank. Some, it just was not protective of the public, which is the board's mission. And so the boards have overwhelmingly been supportive of this idea that the complaint is now going to go to trained enforcement staff members who are going to take a look at the complaint, assess whether or not it is an emergency or not. If so, notify the board so we can have an emergency meeting. If not, then everything is going to be treated the same in terms of the licensee gets a letter, the licensee responds. If records are needed, then they will get it, we'll get the records. Then we'll do a memo to the board saying this is what is in the complaint. Would you like to proceed with formal investigation? And if so, an order of formal investigation will ensue. Then an investigator will be appointed to work with either a recused board member or an investigator. And then it goes back to the board with a report of investigation, and the board makes the decision about whether to proceed to discipline. At all times, the board is fully acting in an adjudicatory role. I think, though, that your question raises a very good point in that what we're finding with the office, and we've contracted with CLEAR, the Council on Licensure and Enforcement, I forget the acronym, but in any event, they're doing an analysis for us as well. I don't think that there's a consensus in the state about what the purpose of the office is. And I think that has led to some issues, right, in terms of, are we, and I know others have told me that we're supposed to just be paying rent, or are we really supposed to be ensuring efficiency, and what does that look like? I think that question has to be answered in order for the office to be successful. I can tell you that around 23 other states have umbrella agencies, and at least the 4 that were surveyed as part of our analysis through CLEAR, and it's a draft form, and I can provide that to you once it's completed, have not observed the similar issues in other states regarding this tug and pull with regard to authority. I think in order for us to get where we need to be in terms of appropriately protecting the public and also ensuring that the regulations are sufficient to meet minimum standards, there has to be oversight. And what we were seeing with what was going on with complaints is that, and that's just a microcosm of the issue in general, is that there were complaints that were not being adjudicated for years, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. That's really unacceptable from a public protection standpoint. It's also not fair for the licensee who needs to get back to work and not have this hanging over their heads. And so I think providing that oversight and really assisting the boards administer those, reducing the timeframes is our end goal. But I agree with you, Representative. I think there are some questions out there that need to be answered in terms of what our overall goal is, because my goal, it doesn't always line up with maybe what others believe it should be.
Thank you. And I think the performance audit will help also going forward and seeing what that comes out as.
Representative Roy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. So just from an experience standpoint, I was actually an investigator for the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine. And it's a very, very complex field to investigate. And it takes a very specific skill set and a very specific background knowledge in medicine, frankly. And we had investigators, we had nurse investigators, and we had attorneys all assigned to that. I cannot imagine a person who has that skill set also being able to do a thorough investigation into building inspectors or home inspectors. How is it that we're going to be able to coalesce all this into one without actually letting the public down, because we're not be able to do a thorough investigation because of the specific background needed by these people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we've done is we've collaborated with the boards. The boards were previously, and I'm talking generally, but every board had their own process, which was precisely the problem. But the large majority of boards were recusing board members, or they had members of a subcommittee in that field. And they were asked to go out and do all the interviews and get all the records and, push the paper around. And so what I think is appropriate, and we also have a physician that we contract with. We also have nurses on staff. We have a medical review subcommittee comprised solely of physicians that we work with. But I think it's very important that we utilize our experts for their expertise. But it's not really fair, in my opinion, to ask them to go do all that administrative work. So the process that we've proposed and that we're working with the boards on is that we pair up a professional investigator with the experts. And they can work together in putting that report of investigation together. Because I agree, and not all cases are quality of care cases. Some of them, it's patently obvious that there could be gross negligence. But there are many cases that require that level of expertise. But I think we need to be utilizing them for their expertise. And then we can promote people wanting to volunteer and participate in the process, because that's another issue we have, is recruiting members. And so I hope that answers your question. I fully agree with you. And I think that we need to be utilizing the expertise of those who are plainly volunteering their precious time to assist with public safety.
Follow up, Madam Chair?
Follow up.
Yeah, I guess you kind of touched on the answer I'm looking for. So let me just give you an example. In the medicine field, you've got a couple primary issues, and standard of care usually isn't the biggest one. You're going to have overprescribing. You're going to have inappropriate conduct with patients. And in those fields, just doing the investigation, you have to know what you're looking for. So sending out a generally trained investigator to take statements, you're going to miss a lot of things. So so like what we used to do is we had a nurse, an investigator, an attorney signed to each case. Now, I know you don't have the money to do that, but that shows you the level of intricacy involved in investigating a medicine case versus some of the other, all the different boards you have in specialities. So that's what my concern is. If we just kind of say, okay, everybody's an investigator for everything, the old saying about jack of all trades.
I agree with you, Representative, and I think I could spend a whole, hour or two long presentation and, dialogue regarding our investigation process, because it's the first thing that we worked on. My goal is to get to a point where we have an attorney, a nurse, or whomever it is assigned to every case. Obviously, there are budgetary issues, which maybe I get members of the general court to help us out with. I come from a background of private practice where I did malpractice work, so that was our model when I was in private practice. So the way we've worked within our resources now is to really leverage the volunteer experience we have. So we do have attorneys in the office that work with our professional investigator, who has experience in a particular different field, who also works with the assigned either physician or other, experts to determine how an investigation should proceed.
Well, just a follow-up comment, Madam Chair. Well, if this legislation that's going to enable all this is going to come before us this year, I would suggest you do bring that hour-and-a-half presentation because I'm going to want to hear all of it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Representative Schuett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Ms. Courtney. Nice to see you. My original idea was similar to Representative Goley and Roy's concerns that with the diversity of boards, I'm not sure that a one-size-fits-all approach is going to be appropriate. So we will be looking at that closely. My question specifically, though, was mentioned the performance audit. Did I hear you say that you were having the open session on that today?
No, we had an entrance meeting, so it was just the kickoff. The kickoff meeting was today, and so we yeah.
So it's just beginning.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That was my question. Thanks.
We will be getting that performance audit once it is complete, no doubt about it.
Right. I just was curious about what kind of time frame we were looking at.
Probably before the end of June, I'd say, but not much before.
Yeah, if they're just starting, that's what I'm thinking. I just, like I said, wanted to see where they were.
Okay. Representative Schmidt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to associate myself with the remarks of the previous questioners on the committee. Some of us have been at this for a long time, and we are confronted by a lot of issues. First of all, there are multiple boards that have come in at different times. Some have been licensed for decades or even more than a century. Others have been licensed very recently, and it is kind of a hodgepodge for sure. And so some degree of standardization is not something I would oppose, and an attempt to reorganize is something that I also think is necessary, because the whole concept was put together. And I, first of all, need to make sure you understand, I've been on the committee now for 15 years. So we have been dealing with this entire process in fits and starts during that entire period, without ever really having that much of a handle on what was going behind the high wall. We would sometimes hear complaints about administrators or administrative procedures and so forth and so on, all without having much access to the facts for quite a while, but also not necessarily having any experience in management. I don't have any management background to speak of, and I don't profess to be able to come in there and with a clean broom and clean house. But there is clear that when the OPLC was conceived of and created, that it was intended to reduce redundancy and enhance efficiency and so forth and so on. Another thing I'd like to reference here is that although the boards, most of the boards are 125% boards, and were intended to make the professions and the occupations pay for their own administration. I think that's not an unreasonable premise, but that they were not intended to be cash cows for the general fund, but that they were, in some cases, by accident or just perhaps on purpose, turned into cash cows, and that I totally oppose. And I think I speak for most of my experienced colleagues in that regard, that we certainly do not want to leave fees at levels that produce extra revenues for the state. However desperately the state may need extra revenue, that's not the way to get them, by using the professions as leverers or as knee breakers, effectively, because you got to pay or you don't get to play. So it's clear that that this whole process is very complex, and also to some degree very entrenched, and redoing it will be difficult. But one of the things that it seems to me that is necessary is, or would be advantageous, is if we are looking at what some other states are doing, so that we are not inventing the wheel entirely on our own. It seems to me like you're going at this with a lot of zeal and a lot of elbow grease, but the question is whether we have the necessary management expertise and whether it really makes sense for us to invent the wheel here in an attempt to get to something that protects the public. You referenced that several times in your testimony, to protect the public, but also to promote and protect the trades and professions. That's all an important function. You referenced PDMP, and I didn't hear you say that that one of the functions was to prevent illegal acquisition and use of various different medications by people who are not in fact ill or needing medication at all, but who are operators who are attempting to get illicit drugs into their hands for sales and so forth and so on. And it was a monitoring program, and I didn't hear you say that. So I think that's possibly the most important driver of the creation of what was originally the PMP and then became PDMP. But anyway, so but I've been involved in a lot of these processes, and I've come to recognize that that there's a great deal of expertise in the boards that is an important ingredient of the whole thing. So one of my questions is, how much resistance are you getting from the boards that seems to be inappropriate as opposed to appropriate?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Just to step back a little bit, we are looking at what other states are doing through CLEAR, and I anticipate having a final report soon. But we contracted with CLEAR to do an overall analysis. Again, as I mentioned, 23 states have a similar umbrella agency, so I agree we shouldn't reinvent the wheel, and we're not going at this blindly. A lot of them have a similar structure to OPLC, and the ones that were interviewed do not have the same issues that New Hampshire has in terms of this question about what is the purpose of an umbrella agency, and the authority of the boards versus the agency. In fact, when I was speaking with our consultants at CLEAR, a lot of the other states were even offended by the question. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that the agencies have existed for a lot longer than New Hampshire. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that there hasn't been a clear pathway for OPLC as an agency, both in strategy, but also, in statute. So that's the first part of it. I'm really looking forward to seeing that final report, because I think that'll provide us with some good talking points and for ways for us to make some decisions. The second piece of that is, how are the boards feeling? I fully believe in collaboration. Unfortunately, that takes a lot longer. And I think OPLC has been in crisis for about 5 years, and since its inception, as we've seen with the constant turnover for executive management, the issues within the agency, and I have a lot of opinions as to why that is. It's not really an operating environment that anybody really wants to work on, so we're trying to address that in an expeditious manner. But I think a lot of the boards, in collaborating with them, they have gotten on board because they have also been tired of the issues that that we've had to deal with. And I'll give you that example for our enforcement unit. We had been sending the majority of our cases over to the Attorney General's office and the Administrative Prosecutions Unit. We obviously have we have an agreement with them, and we fully fund their APU. And we started to see some resource issues, and obviously cases were lagging at 2 or 3 years, which is completely unacceptable.
Agreed.
And so we said there needs to be more oversight, and the boards are fully in agreement with that. So we created this new structure in-house where we are accountable. We are providing oversight. If cases are taking on too long, I can go down to my staff and say, what is going on? You need to prioritize this. This is a problem. And there's that accountability, and the boards are seeing that. And all of them agreed through a standing order, the ones that we're bringing on board. I think mental health is the last one. They've all done this voluntarily through collaboration. So we may not always agree regarding, the process, but we've gotten to a point where I think we've developed good relationships with the majority of them, that they're willing to try something new, because what we've been doing hasn't been working. What the boards were doing, I don't think had been working, because these are full-time professionals who, for the most part, are working in the field, and they don't have time to devote to constant continued improvement for process improvement. So I hope that answers your question, Representative. We're doing a lot of collaboration.
I think this committee has certainly manifested a considerable interest in helping the agency to work effectively and efficiently, but also we've had a lot of concerns because there are a number of, although we have a number of new members this time around, we also have a majority of the committee has been around for quite a while, been in the legislature for quite a while, been on this committee for quite a while, and thus has seen the so-called evolution of the agency from, the old days of the joint board and Board of Mental Health Practice and all the other boards to what we are seeing today, and has a lot of concerns, but also a lot of dedication to trying and assist this entity in functioning effectively. And so I can speak for myself, and I think I can speak for some of my experienced colleagues, that we want to be involved in what comes about here, and to not, we don't want to give you blanket authority for things that we have not gotten a very good handle on reasons for. So
thank you, Representative.
I'll leave it with that for the moment, but we do want to be very closely involved.
Thank you. Representative Fellows.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 2 questions. The first one is there a report that will tell us how many complaints are filed annually and what those complaints are about, the different boards involved? And my second question is, does the public and do employers have access to the certification database to check on the status of somebody's credentials?
Yes, yes to both. So we have an annual report that's required by statute for us to be completed every November 1. That's posted on our website, and that has a list of the complaints by boards. What I will say, though, is historically we've relied on board administrators who were fielding these complaints to keep track of the complaints, and I don't think it was an accurate data set. And so that has been changed going forward with the consolidation of enforcement efforts in one bureau. And what we've seen between September and the end of December, we had about 650 complaints received, which is about double what was previously reported. So I do not think that was an accurate reflection. I think in our next annual report, it'll be about 3,000 is my anticipation. With respect to your second question, yes, we have a licensee lookup tool. So if you go onto, I think it's newhampshirelicenses.nh.gov, you can type in somebody's name and their credentials should be listed there. And if they have any disciplinary history, that should also be listed there.
So just one follow-up if possible.
Follow-up.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier that you thought it was not necessary to have photos. I would think that if you're going to have a database where somebody can look up, for example, to see if a plumber is licensed, that it might be useful to have a photo of that plumber also.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think what we've seen with the
do you agree? It's a question. Do you agree?
I can see how that might be helpful, but one of the other things that I think we need to think about, and I'm not married to anything, but we need to think about A, privacy, and B, we need to think about potential bias. And one of the things that we've seen with occupational licensing is that when you're using humans to do anything, there are opportunities for implicit bias. I have personally seen it, and I won't comment on particular boards or their operations. But so there is a movement nationwide to eliminate those sort of bias, subjective requirements, and the photograph is one of them. The other thing is, if we're requiring a photograph at every renewal from an efficiency standpoint, which we don't presently require photographs at renewal, we require them at initial licensing only. At some point, somebody's photograph is going to become completely outdated and useless. So I think those are the things that we need to think about. And again, I'm not married to anything, but I want the boards to be engaging in this type of analysis. This is what I'd like to encourage them to do, because just because we've done something for 30 years doesn't mean it's the best way to be doing it. I think New Hampshire can eventually be on the cutting edge of occupational licensing and looking at what do we really need to ensure minimum standards are satisfied, and then what is just extra. That is a barrier to workforce, because we have seen that our current licensing structure is in a lot of ways a barrier to workforce entry. We've seen that with mental health. And I think that if you didn't have, and now I'm on my soapbox, but if you didn't have OPLC as an agency, we wouldn't, for example, have been able to do what the state did with regards to emergency licensing. It wouldn't have happened. And I think that's a benefit that we've seen, but we also saw through the emergency licensing process what sort of barriers we have in place.
Thank you. Representative Pearson?
Okay. This whole business about a photo here, okay? If we're trying to verify credentials of someone, a photo is a part of that process. We put a photo on a driver's license. We put a photo on a passport. This is not a social experiment. This is a verification process that someone's credentials match the person that you are either trying to bring in or trying to use. It's not a privacy issue. If I'm trying to verify the credentials of a licensed plumber, and I'm doing that, let's just say, because I'm bringing this plumber into my home to do work, that's not a privacy issue. Hardly. It's a relationship issue for me to verify that I'm bringing someone in that has the credentials that they claim they do. So I fully reject the idea that a photo is somehow a problem here. As far as updating a photo, every single one of us have shot a zillion very bad photos off of these things, okay? We've taken more photographs in the last year than the first 100 years of the camera. So the idea that it would be difficult for someone to update a photo is just I don't buy it. I mean, you can do that with a cell phone in 3 seconds. And with the push for continued advancements in technology with OPLC, and you talk about bringing licensing up to a faster level, well, then certainly a reapplication and the ability to upload a photo should be part of that.
If I may, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
I mentioned the photo merely as an opportunity that I think boards need to engage in and questions about what is actually required. I do not believe any state publishes photographs of their licensees. I'm a licensed attorney in 2 states. There's not a photograph. I think one way to accomplish that goal, right, is to ask for a driver's license and look up whether or not that's the actual person on the license tool. But again, I don't want to get sidetracked on whether a photo is great, whether it's not. The point is that the boards are engaging in this analysis, which we haven't been doing. That was really my intent regarding the comment regarding the photograph.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. I don't see any.
Well, thank you all for your time. I'm happy to, talk offline about anything that I've talked about today and any of our initiatives as we're going forward, and certainly the legislation that I'm sure will come before you as well.
We've got a fair number of bills that I'm sure you'll be involved with.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
All right. So thank you all for attending. I'm wish we could have done this in person because it's a lot more informative, but under the circumstances, I think this is about as good as we're going to get. Tomorrow, there's a briefing from the governor's office, or actually, I think it's the Attorney General, on the emergency orders. Pam, could you talk to?
Sure. There's a senior associate attorney general, Jill Perlow, will be coming in to talk about the law that addresses states of emergency. And that's about it.
Because that we have a number of bills on that this year, and it's very topical. And
Right.
after that, Representative Schmidt and I will give a 30,000-foot briefing on the administrative rule process that I hope will not take too long. I'm trying to schedule hearings for next week, but I haven't yet figured out or haven't been informed of what days we can use. So I will let you know when I know, which will, who knows when that'll happen. And thanks again. Any other questions or comments?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Representative Schmidt.
Thank you. So I've heard an interesting new pronunciation of one of our colleagues' names today, and I'm wondering if we could have Michael tell us how he pronounces his last name, because I have been pronouncing it differently than you did, and I am very sensitive to linguistic things. So I'm wondering if we could have some clarification about how to correctly pronounce Representative, what I thought it was Yakubovich, but who knows?
You got it. That's correct.
Okay.
Yakubovich.
Okay, I will attempt to maintain that.
Thank you.
Yes, and if anyone else, if I mangle your name, which I tend to do, please catch me before it goes on for 15 years like Representative Likas did.
Yes. Thank you for correcting that too, Tony.
Yeah, I think, I don't remember what happened 15 years ago. I suspect once or twice, or maybe I'm misremembering, I corrected it, but usually I then give up. So, and maybe I was remembering someone else. So apologize for not doing it earlier. Actually, while we're on that topic, I won't try the last name, but Matthew, if you could say your name, because I'm not certain how to say it.
Okay, please.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't even know if I know how to say it, since I'm a third generation American at this point, but I've been saying Sant'Anastaso.
Sant'Anastaso, okay.
Okay.
Sant'Anastaso, thank you.
Sant'Anastaso.
We will all try to use that, because no matter if it's right or wrong for your grandparents, if that's the way you use it, that's the way we should do it.
Exactly, I totally agree.
Thanks again. I will see you in the morning, I hope, and
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock.
Right.
Yes, you should all be
Thanks,
doing
sir.
that.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. We'll see you then.
Good afternoon,
Bye.
everybody.
See you tomorrow.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Bye.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Or reservoir.